Okay, 3, 2, 1.
This is good. All right. Okay.
These are the questions that might be on your mind right now. Questions such as, my relationship isn't working and I don't know why. I'm not in a relationship. Finding the right person feels impossible. My last relationship left me feeling broken and damaged. I don't know what I want anymore. I'm not sure if I know what a good relationship even looks like. But before you ask all of that, what you have to know is, why do people have relationships?
Why do people get involved in relationships? Well, the key idea here is needs. People get involved in relationships in order to address their needs. Well, first we are talking about physical needs, like being taken care of, like providing me with food and shelter and safety. And this is all we actually went through as infants. And the relationship that we had back then was critical to our survival, and we are still depending on like quite a few other people to provide us with like what we need physically in order to survive. The other set of needs, right, is what we can call psychological and interpersonal needs. That refers to like our need for security, attachment, affiliation, and intimacy. And then we have the social needs, right? Things like sense of identity, our social position, status, and access to resources and opportunities in our social world, right? So those are the needs. And for some of us, not all of us, we're talking about needs at a higher level. Like many of us talk about like existential or spiritual needs, like people talk about, purpose, talk about, a sense of being and like a sense of like union with the universe and cosmic forces. Those are like another way of looking at needs. So we can be looking at these needs in 4 different levels, like physical, psychological, social, and like the more transcendental, like the existential and the spiritual. Yes, we know that human beings get involved in relationships because there are needs to address. So when I'm thinking about myself, like what do? The first question is to find out what are my needs that I'm trying to address through developing relationships with other people. And when we do that, like we have to understand that like not everyone understands his or her needs clearly. One of the questions that we always ask people in like lectures and like seminars and workshops is to have people tell me how many people in your life you think have a good understanding of what your needs are. And well, I'm not going to give you the answer. Later on, if you click on an exercise on this MOOC, you'll be able to see what people are telling me. Okay, so that is like the first important question that you need to ask. What are your needs? Well, we get involved in relationships to address our own needs. We can look at our needs as having like 2 major types. One type of needs, we call them intrinsic, meaning that like you are involved in a relationship because you want to be enjoying the relationship for its own sake. And in this particular situation, we'll be talking about people trying to meet intrinsic needs such as like affiliation, attachment, and intimacy. The other type of motivation for relationship is what I sometimes refer to as extrinsic. And there are 2 subtypes here. We can be talking about extrinsic personal or extrinsic instrumental. Well, when something is extrinsic, that means that we're not enjoying the relationship for its own sake, but we are actually building the relationship in order to achieve something else. That is why it is called extrinsic. But that something else that we want to achieve can be personal. Like when I'm feeling lonely and insecure, I want to have someone to be accompanying me so that I feel like a little bit more safe and comfortable. So, or I need to derive like some satisfaction in terms of like passing my time and like not getting bored. So when I do that, like this is using the relationship to achieve something else, but that something else is directly related to what I personally need. When we talk about instrumental motivations, then we are talking about we are using the relationship to achieve or to get something else, which may or may not be even personal. Say, for example, I may be getting someone to help my son get out of trouble, or I'm trying to sell you a product so that that will make my boss happy. And then I start building this relationship with you. And this is the kind of relationship that I would characterize as instrumental.
Just to summarize, there are 2 major types of needs, intrinsic and extrinsic. And extrinsic is further broken down into personal extrinsic and instrumental extrinsic.
Well, relationships are also important because they do not only meet our needs, but they also help us define who we are. In a way, it's actually quite fair to say that, like we become who we are as a result of the relationships that we have. As children, we got exposed to like people who took care of us, like our parents, and they might tell us that like we are smart or we are ugly or we are pretty or like we are stupid, that we are selfish or like we are wonderful, nice characters. So all these feedback that we got like from relationships will feed into this like sense of self that we now carry. So it is really important to look at like how relationships are impacting on who we think we are, what we think we are. Well, relationships are the key to our happiness, quality of life, and our sense of well-being. There is actually like significant research evidence pointing in the direction that like the quality of your relationship actually has a direct impact on your overall quality of life. And whatever we are thinking of, like in our quest for happiness, it has to be negotiated through building relationships with other people. So it is why it is so important for us to be paying more attention to understand how relationships work in our lives.
The SSLD is a system that helps us to learn to change lives. Being in a relationship can make one feel secured, content, and joyous. But what if I have a problem? It can mean one or more of the following. Something you did not expect has happened. You do not have what it takes to deal with the situation. You're not getting what you want. What you have, what you are doing, or who you are is threatened. Or you do not know what the hell is happening. This is precisely the time when SSLD steps in. The Strategies and Skills Learning and Development System, also known as SSLD. It aims to translate unmanageable problems into something manageable. In SSLD, we translate problems into goals that are able to be attained. Over decades of practice, the SSLD practitioners have learned that most of the human problems and goals in lives are related to human needs that haven't been met. Therefore, the SSLD learning system is designed to enable people to address their needs and achieve their goals more effectively through learning and developing strategies and skills. There are two key words: strategies and skills. Strategies involve a sequence of actions aiming at achieving a particular goal. And skills are something that you can do well to accomplish a given task. The SSLD model is a learning system developed by Professor Katak Zhang at the University of Toronto. Based on his extensive practice experience in mental health, social service, and human development, the SSLD emphasizes: first, a learner-centered design. Second, multiple contingencies thinking, so to help addressing particular circumstances and needs. Third, empowerment. And fourth, intersecting diversity. The SSLD system has been applied to deal with a wide range of human problem situations. The system is based on Professor Zhang's belief that we have already moved into a post-professional era, in which complex issues in human life usually demand solutions that require knowledge and skills taken from more than one single profession or discipline. Therefore, the SSLD system aims to mobilize knowledge from multiple sources as an effective interface, with people taking on different perspectives and working with different constructions of reality. In general, in the SSLD model, we translate problems into goals, and there are a few steps in this procedure. First, in SSLD, problems and symptoms are viewed as functional. It is important to remember that problems usually reflect unmet needs. When people do not have better means to address these needs, they will keep using the same tricks even when they are not very effective, and even create problems. The problem translation procedure aims to gain a better understanding of the client's needs, and thus we will be able to set realistic goals. Then we take action through SSLD. We can learn and develop new strategies and skills to address our needs and attain our goals. When we master more effective strategies and skills to address our needs, we do not have to rely on the old methods. which are the problems that are initially identified. The SSLD system reaches beyond problem solving. With SSLD, we expand our range of options, and therefore our capacity to deal with problems and challenges in life. We will achieve our desired goals in life, address our needs, and solve our problems. This is accomplished by learning to think and take action in a different way. We can imagine a real-life case of partner abuse and place the problem in the SSLD framework. Firstly, the problems identified include controlling the partner, restricting her social life, physical violence, and verbal abuse. After analyzing the above problems, we can identify the corresponding needs of the perpetrator of abuse, for example, security, control, self-esteem, and intimacy. SSLD practitioners are trained to help the clients to set realistic goals and to achieve them systematically through learning and developing strategies and skills. Possible strategies and skills could include anger management, emotional regulation and expression, relationship and intimacy skills, developing meaningful occupation and social competence. We believe that people can learn to change their lives. For more information, please visit the SSLD website at ssld.ktzang.com.
Well, we have been talking about needs for a while now. Actually, the most important SSLD concepts involves not only needs. We have this idea that we refer to as the N3C analysis. So the N stands for the needs, which we have talked briefly about. And then the three Cs refer to circumstances, characteristics, and capacity. So other than the N3C, another important concept is the idea of individual difference. The SSLD system do not make easy generalizations about people. We always focus on specific individual situations. So the N3C actually is individualized. Once we understand that, the N3C that is individualized, will be helpful for us to negotiate relationships and understand key concepts such as compatibility, how compatible we are, how do we interact, what is the best way to interact, and what do we do to make sure that the relationship leads to not only the gratification of my needs, but also the gratification of the needs of whoever is involved. This is the concept of mutual need gratification. The first C in the three Cs is circumstances. So when we look at circumstances, we can at least be looking at it from three levels. The first level is what I would refer to as the macro level. It's talking about the big picture. We can be talking about say the financial meltdown, global warming, and then the other aspect that I really want to draw attention to is what I would call demographics, and more specifically historic demography. Say for example, if you happen to be a baby boomer, then you have a very different life than someone who is born into another historic period. So this is part of the big picture circumstances that you're part of. If you're born in 1945, you have a very different life than someone who was born in 1985. So the next level is what I refer to as the meso level, which is sort of more local realities. Say, for example, I'm now living in Canada and I'm living under a particular political, legal, taxation, education, and healthcare system, which may be the same or very different than that in the country that you are from. And when we look at these circumstances, we also have to understand that this can be referring to very specific changes in the regional or local context. Like say here in Canada, fluctuations in the natural resource market would have like some direct impact on our economy. And if you're from a country that is not as reliant on natural resources as we are, then like you have a different reality. Here in the city that I'm living in, the public transit system and the internet service were pretty annoying and frustrating, but compared to like the better run systems in our parts of the world. If you are from a city like with like better public transit systems and better access to the internet, then your circumstances would be different than mine. And then when we get down to the other aspect of the meso reality, we can be referring to what I sometimes call the social cultural realities or your immediate social cultural realities. That refers to your social circle, your reference groups, the people you hang out with, and the kind of culture and they support their values and like the conventional practices that are popular among these people you know. Then, like we can come to the third level, the micro level of circumstances. That is what I would call your personal circumstances. It can be like your employment status, like you're employed full-time, part-time, unemployed. It can also be referring to your like health condition, or are you in good health or you're not in good health. It can also be referring to your life stage, whether you're now like a student or you're just beginning a career, or you have like just like finished like parenting your children and now you're like into the next phase of your life, or you're taking care of your aging parents. So these are your like personal circumstances. It can also include, say, your relationship status, whether you're like single, like divorced or widowed. So those are your personal circumstances.
Just to recap, there are 3 levels of circumstances. Macro, which is at the global level, meso, which is at the local or regional level, and micro, which is your personal level.
The second C is characteristics. Well, the first type of characteristics is the physical characteristics, which can be referring to your height, your body type. It can also be referring to like some physical features that are related to your ethnicity or your gender or your age, right? Such as like the color of your hair, the color of your skin, like the shape of your body, things like that. And then we will be talking about like your psychological characteristics, and the first thing that probably would come to mind for you is like your personality, and you're right. And it can also include like your values, your worldview, your personal preferences. It is also important for us to highlight that like, your psychological characteristics include your like emotional and behavioral patterns, which are sometimes not given enough attention. In everyday language, we sometimes refer to this as like habits. And I just want to highlight that like what we normally do with our feelings and emotions is another key aspect that SSLD will be paying attention to, and we hope you will too. And the third aspect, all right, of characteristics would be what I call social cultural characteristics. And that can include like your lifestyle, it can include like your cultural practice or like religious practice, like whether you're being vegan or whether you celebrate Thanksgiving, Ramadan, or the Lunar New Year. So all these like physical, psychological, and social characteristics like make up this like broader concept of characteristics, which is the second of the 3 C's. Capacity is characteristics. So why do we need like another C in the formula? Why don't we just say N2C? The reason why we have like singled out capacity from characteristics is we want to emphasize the positive aspects of people's characteristics. Say, for example, speaking French or speaking German or speaking Chinese can be considered a characteristic of a person, but it can also be regarded as a capacity. When will it become a capacity? Well, when the language is useful and needed, right? So this very interesting relationship between characteristics and capacity, right, is something that like the SSLD system focuses on. By focusing on strength rather than limitation, we're bringing in sort of a more proactive and optimistic view of our own nature and in our own lives. So we will be like talking about the same categories in capacity as in characteristics. So we have like obviously physical capacity, right? That can be referring to like your physical strength, your like energy level, your like immunity and like physical skills that you have. We can also be talking about psychological capacity, which would include your intelligence, like the knowledge you have, your sense of like self-efficacy, which is a concept that like you'll learn more about later in this course, right? Self-efficacy generally refers to how you feel or believe that you are capable of like achieving or attaining your goals in life. And we can also be talking about emotional capacity or resilience, and we can also be talking about your social and interpersonal skills. And then the third aspect of capacity is what I refer to as like social cultural capacity. It can refer to your social capital, you know, like the connections, the people you know, the status you enjoy. It can also be referring to like symbolic capital that you have, you know, like your knowledge, your degrees, your credentials. It can also be referring to your financial capacity, which would include the wealth that you own and the credit that you may have access to. So all these, right, added together would be your capacity. And as I said, your capacity is just the more positive aspects of your characteristics, but we want you to pay more attention to it. That is why we have taken it out and put it into this N3C formula.
It is important to remember that although capacity is characteristics, capacity only focuses on the positive aspects of an individual's characteristics. That is why capacity has the same categories, which are physical, psychological, and social cultural. For any relationship to occur, you obviously would involve at least two people. We have Sam and Leslie. They each would get into a relationship because they have needs that they want to be addressing, and their needs can also be different. Say, for example, Sam may need affiliation, attachment, intimacy. Leslie may be looking for security, support, and proving himself or herself. These two sets of needs may be very compatible, or they may get into conflict with each other. And what they would need to do is, obviously, to communicate and see if they can negotiate a better outcome. And Leslie and Sam, when they get together, meet each other, and start to develop a relationship, there will be a different set of circumstances. Sam may be someone who is divorced or unemployed. Leslie may be someone who just got promoted, or he or she may have some form of childcare obligation. And there's, of course, the circumstances in which they meet. They may be meeting in a class, or see each other in a museum, or even meet in a party. Both of them will be bringing in their own characteristics into the picture. Leslie may be a highly controlling and suspicious person. Sam, on the other hand, can be someone who is sensitive and emotional. And again, how compatible these two sets of characteristics are is an open question. Finally, whether a relationship is going to work out well or not will be contingent upon their respective capacities. And this can be referring to financial, intellectual, emotional, social capital, or something like physical strength and skill. And whether a relationship will work out or not would be very much depending on how their needs, circumstances, characteristics, and capacities are negotiated. And have you noticed in this particular presentation, the word relationship is missing one letter? Yes, you are right. In relationships, the most important part is the N, the interaction, the communication, and the compatibility between the two parties. So you can actually talk about another set of N3Cs: communication, compatibility, and collaboration.
Well, relationships are often considered like challenging and difficult to manage in life, and that's why we have like such an industry almost, right? Trying to help people manage their relationships, including this particular MOOC course that you are taking. But the key idea that we want to propose here from the SSLD perspective is that like we do not look at problems as problems. So how do we do that? Like we translate problems into something positive that we can do. And the process entails, one, understanding problems in terms of unmet needs. So when we say that like this couple has a problem and they're not communicating with each other, we're asking, so what needs are not being met when they're not communicating with each other? So like one of them may feel that like I'm being neglected, I'm not being understood, or the other party may feel that like, I'm not being like taken seriously, or like many of my emotional needs are not like recognized or met. And then they say, well, we have a problem. So in the SSLD model, we will be looking at what needs are not met when we encounter any problems. In this MOOC, you'll be able to look at like a few examples of like how SSLD translates problems into things that we can do. What we can do normally is to look at those unmet needs and figure out effective ways to address those needs so that those needs are met, and then the problem will be resolved. Instead of like dwelling on like this is a problem and then blaming your partner for not doing this and not doing that, we ask a different set of questions. So what are our needs that are not met? What can be done collaboratively, like between the two of us, to create a situation in which our needs would be better met? And then like we will both be happier as a result of that. So that is the general approach to look at relationship problems, so to speak. Well, in the SSLD system, we pay a lot of attention to individual differences. And differences can be a challenge in relationships because like when people are negotiating relationships, right, when someone thinks differently, acts differently, believe in different things, like look at things differently, it can sometimes create a problem or a challenge. So helping people to understand the value of difference is an important first step in understanding relationships. So a key concept that we are now taking in from the life sciences and the social sciences is this concept of biodiversity. The SSLD system embraces what we call a diversity positive attitude, meaning that like we like diversity, we enjoy diversity, we think that diversity is a good thing. So why do we think so? Well, first of all, biodiversity is actually a condition for human evolution. I do not want to give you a whole lecture on biology here, but like if you're interested, you can easily have access to like all sorts of interesting discussions and documentation on this concept of biodiversity. So for natural selection to happen, we need to have biodiversity. So like we have like diverse variations of like manifestations of genes and phenomena so that natural selection can take place. So that is like one of the most important points. The second point that I want to make is that like relationship always involves differences, right? So otherwise, like you'll be only developing a relationship of a clone of yourself, right? Anyone else that you're developing a relationship with will have something that is different. So being able to deal with the difference is actually the key to the success of any relationship. And managing diversity, in our opinion, is part and parcel of human growth and evolution, whether we're talking about like individual personal growth or like collective social development. The ability to manage diversity is always essential.
What we want you to remember is that being able to deal with differences is actually the key to the success of any relationship, and that managing diversity is part of human growth and evolution. That is why understanding the importance of biodiversity would help you embrace the differences of others.
The balance between similarity and difference is a key factor in relationships. Very often you hear people giving you the recommendation that like you should be like looking for someone who is similar to you in terms of A, B, and C. And then sometimes you find yourself being attracted to someone who is like very different. So what should we be doing? I would just say that any categorical answer is likely to be wrong because we do feel attracted to things that are similar, and then we also feel attracted to things that are different. And what we are attracted to and what will work for us actually varies from one time to another, from one relationship to another, and even within the same relationship, this balance can change over time. So the key question is not like whether we should be looking for similarity or difference, but the key question is to be able to deal with difference and similarities. So in the SSLD model, our major approach is to help people to appreciate and recognize differences and how to manage them effectively so that we will always be able to create a win-win situation that will lead to like maximum need gratification for all the parties involved. Well, when we are trying to develop capacity for difference, this is the language we use in SSLD. We talk about capacity, and then the capacity for difference is our ability, like, to deal with difference in a constructive manner. One of the things that we want people to know is that, like, differences will continue to emerge as you get to know the other person better in any relationship. Like, you discover differences. And the other thing is, like, people do grow and develop and change. And actually, you will learn later in this course that in an ideal relationship, we actually expect people to be growing and changing and developing rather than like staying the same all the time. So being able to deal with difference is like a sort of like a very essential, critical skill that we all have to master. So when we're going through this, like some of the things that we really want to encourage people to develop is an interest, a curiosity regarding things that are different. So when you come across things that are different or like qualities in another person that are different, instead of like dreading and avoiding, we want you to like develop initially at least like, you know, some curiosity to find out more about it. Here in Canada, like we use like concepts like tolerance, which in my opinion is not the best word. Like if there's something that you have to tolerate, that means it is like potentially unpleasant. I would really want people to be able to live a life in which you do not have to tolerate a lot of things, but you can like become curious and interested in things that are different, that are unfamiliar, and you're able to embrace them and maybe even to enjoy them. That is actually the ideal in the SSLD approach. Later on, like hopefully through this course, you'll be able to learn a thing or two, or in terms of the strategies and skills that would be useful to enhance your capacity to embrace and enjoy difference that might emerge in the relationships that you're building.
From the SSLD perspective, we'd like you to develop an ability to deal with differences in a constructive manner, to develop an interest and curiosity regarding things that are different rather than tolerating. And this would become your capacity for differences.
So often in relationships, we find that the couple seems to be really different. Is there a way that we manage these differences?
Yes, I think managing differences would be like a very central part of any relationship, because like human beings are all different, like we are all unique, so we will always have differences. But one way to look at differences is to like try to look at it positively. We do not necessarily have to look at differences as problems. Differences are actually a condition for like growth and development. I see it as a manifestation of biodiversity, and biodiversity like is the very condition for human evolution and social development. So when we look at differences, we know that we can always find ways to manage differences, and I think like human beings as a species would not get to where we are today if we didn't have the capacity to deal with differences. In the SSLD model, we try to look at differences as an opportunity to create and design what we call like win-win designs when there are like two parties involved, or sometimes we talk about all-win design when there are like more than two parties involved. And when we do that, like what we mean specifically is that like all the participants' needs would be met, right? And meeting everyone's needs, right, is our primary objective, and this is like the characteristic of an SSLD intervention.
Okay, so could you give me maybe a real life example of a win-win or an all-win scenario?
Yeah, like so. Say for example, we have like this couple, right, who came from very different backgrounds. Like one partner uh, comes from a privileged background, and then the other partner, like, basically was living in poverty, like during her childhood. And so when they share life together, right, they obviously have like very different memories, expectations, preferences. Like when they have to make decisions on like where to go on vacation, what hotel to stay in, where to go for like dinner, there can be tension, between them. So one of the things that we ask them to do in a couple counseling workshop is to sit down and talk about their childhood experience and try to maximize the similarities, right? So, for instance, we will ask the husband to think of situations in his childhood. Even though he was privileged, there would be like moments when he also felt frustrated and deprived, and those are the things that he could share with his partner and establish some empathic connection. We also would encourage the wife to help her husband, right, understand that happiness is like not always predicated on like material resources, and so we basically got them through a process of like sharing childhood experiences that had an impact on them, but like trying to get on to what is like common between them, right? That would be like go outside of the material conditions, but look at like subjective emotional experience. So the central core belief that we have in SSLD is that although differences in biodiversity are given facts, but another equally real aspect of human life is that we always have something in common, right? So like negotiating this like similarity and difference is both as we say, right? Like an art and a science, right? So like, we try to bring it together and how people negotiate, a relationship that will work for them.
Congratulations, you have just completed session 1. From here, you might be wondering how you can maximize your learning. So be sure to do the homework, do the readings, follow the links to the resources that we provide in these modules, and also go back and review these modules whenever you feel it's necessary. We've also provided some supplementary modules to expand your learning, so feel free to access those as well. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us, and we'll be sure to help you out. See you next time. Professor Tsang, before we start this session, what are some of the main concepts that we're going to be talking about?
Well, in this session, I think what we are going to be covering is like the kind of preparatory work that we think people should be paying attention to. So we'll be talking about like what we should be thinking about before you even start developing a relationship. So under that broad topic, we'll be looking at the kind of scripts that people would be following, the kind of traps involved in like following the scripts, and how we're going to be like developing or authoring our own scripts, and then we would also be dealing with this big issue of like when we are doing things like sort of systematically and methodologically, what happens to like this like conventional ideas of romance and spontaneity, and some people sort of get fascinated by the idea of like destiny, serendipity and fate and all that. So that is like one big piece, and then the other part, of course, is like we are in a sort of like more practice-oriented mode here. Then, if we still have time in session 2, we obviously would want to cover what do you actually do when you start a relationship. We'll be talking about the initial contact, engagement, and those. That probably would be what I would like to cover in this session.
Social script is an important concept, not only in SSLD, actually is an important concept like in the social sciences and humanities. What we're referring to were scripts that are socially constructed by any given society, governing the life of the members or the people living in it. And these scripts are not actually like written and published, because many of the scripts are actually unspoken, but most people like living in that particular community would have some awareness of that, and they would also be following it. Let me give you an example. Like in like Western cultures, for instance, in the last while, we believe that like people would start dating or developing intimate relationships later in their adolescent years. And if you started developing a relationship like Romeo and Juliet did before you hit 14, it would be considered problematic. Well, it obviously was not considered problematic like when Shakespeare wrote the play. So we see that what is considered appropriate or inappropriate actually do change over time. And when we look at the scripts that you're following, like sometimes inadvertently or unconsciously, would include things like who should be making the call first, like if we go on a first date, should I be picking up the tab? So those are the kind of questions that the social scripts are already answering. They may actually be guiding you towards asking the questions. Say, for example, here in the West, people believe that like for most people, you go through this sequence of like getting to know someone, dating, and then like you may propose, and then you get engaged, and then you get married, and then you get separated, you get divorced. So you go through that sequence. But you can easily imagine in like some other cultures, people do not necessarily go through that sequence. And even right here, where I live, right, in the city of Toronto and in Canada, well, quite a few people have actually chosen not to follow that script. But then, for people who are not following that script, Interestingly, they may actually be following other scripts. I'll give you an example. If you're gay and you're young, you're living in Toronto, when you're negotiating relationships, there are also unspoken rules that the gay community here would like subscribe to. And there are things that are cool to do and there are things that are not cool to do. So negotiating relationships in a way is always governed by some kind of social script. And the key idea that I want to propose is for you to be at least aware that you are following certain scripts. And you have to be aware of why you are following those scripts. And then, like when you got that, I will be making another proposal, right? You have to allow yourself to be open to this possibility, which can be like scary, but it can also be exciting depending on your own personal position on this. What I'm referring to is the possibility of you authoring your own script for relationships instead of following what is readily available in your immediate social reality.
And when you're talking about social scripts and the traps, what exactly does that mean?
Well, we understand that like people, even though when they're thinking that like I'm going to be like following my heart and I'm going to be spontaneous, even those ideas actually come from specific scripts that are made available or possible by society. So like in different historical periods and in different societies, people would have like different kinds of expectations with regard to what that relationship would look like. Say, for example, if you're in like a totally feudalistic, patriarchal context, you do not really think that you can fall in love because everything is arranged by your parents. Then you move into the situation with a totally different set of scripts. So, like in each society, it has its own kind of scripts that people would be following. And each of these scripts, I must say, would also carry its own traps, right? Say, for example, when you're in a highly regulated patriarchal context, if you follow the script, then obviously you would have very limited space for your personal expression, autonomy, and choice, right? And here in the West, when we talk about our like dominant or popular scripts, those would involve like having people think about lifelong, monogamous, exclusive marriages. Very often, people are even imagining, only heterosexual relationships. Like these kind of scripts also carry their own traps. Uh, One obvious example is that like most people believe that the normal relationship is for man, woman fall in love, get engaged, get married, and live happily thereafter. Well, we have like decades of social research showing us that it is not really the case for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've worked with some people who kind of seem to get into maybe what like could be considered unhealthy relationships or have kind of similar unhealthy patterns within their relationships. Could those be considered other risks or traps that people get into?
Yeah, I think yeah, like hate to be saying this, like a lot of people are actually disappointed in their relationships, and many people actually do not get what they need in the relationships. Very often because like they were following misguided scripts or notions of where things are going. Um, so this is like why in this course we want to be addressing some of those, right? We talk about some traps associated with like dominant social scripts, but then like individuals also carry their own expectations with regard to relationships. One of the like very commonly found problem is that because people do not think about what they really need, they would just follow what like most people would do. One example is like the sort of like popular practice of like certain standardized rituals, which do not necessarily meet individual needs, but everyone would be following them. Like one example I can immediately think of is like how consumerism has totally taken over our expression of love and affection. Like just imagine what people do on Valentine's Day. Like it would be chocolates, flowers, fine dining. Or if you're better resourced, you might throw in a piece of jewelry maybe. But then it doesn't really requires creativity and sensitivity to your partner's like specific needs and circumstances. And then obviously like everyone will be spending money and you pay like maybe I don't know 50% more or like 100% more for the same bunch of flower that you would otherwise get. But then this consumerism is like out there and everyone follows. And then the other example that I can easily give is the kind of money that people spend on engagement parties and weddings, and how much do those contribute to the health of the relationship and to the respective and collective well-being of the couples involved. It's a big question, but this is what people do.
Social scripts are the set of behaviors, patterns, or paths that people follow just because it is what everyone else is doing. These scripts may not actually meet your needs, circumstances, etc. This is when people fall into this trap that if you're not following the dominant social script, your behaviors may be seen as illogical or even abnormal. Consumerism is an example where this idea has taken over our expression of love and affection. But how much does it contribute to the health of your relationship? And this is an example of what a trap is.
Okay, so what you're saying is people will kind of follow these dominant social scripts that exist that don't actually always meet their needs, circumstances, etc. But then, and that kind of is a trap. But then what about when people just seem to fall into these sort of unhealthy patterns in relationships?
Yeah, you can also call those like traps, but those are sort of like more individualized.
Okay.
But like from our experience, though, right, when we see many of those situations, then we can see that there's actually like patterns to it. Uh, the the popular theory around now, right, is the attachment theory, which basically explains to us how our early childhood experience would have like lasting effects on our relationship patterns later in life. Without going into the technical details of the theory, what I can say is that, like, according to attachment theory, uh, people who have not developed a healthy, secured attachment pattern during infancy and childhood are likely to run into the similar difficulties later in life. There are like different kinds of like insecure attachment patterns, but I don't think we can go through them in detail now. I just want to give one example. Say, for example, someone was very insecure as an infant or as a child because he or she was not properly taken care of by the parent, and had to be like worried about being abandoned or neglected. This person grows up, right, and this person is likely to be like more sensitive, to any signs of like abandonment or rejection, and it is more likely for this person to be like jealous, possessive, and controlling. And as we know, like when you behave like that, it's sort of like will fit into a vicious cycle, and you run the risk of like actually having a higher chance of like driving your partner away, right? And that sort of like reinforces this sense of insecurity, right? So you can see that like someone like that will just like go on having difficulties with relationships and like repeating the same pattern over.
A theory introduced here is the attachment theory, which explains to us how early childhood experience would have lasting effects on our relationship patterns later in life. For example, if someone had an unhealthy and insecure attachment pattern during infancy and childhood, this person is more likely to run into similar situations in life, such as being more controlling or jealous in a relationship.
Is there a way to change these unhealthy attachment patterns?
Yeah, fortunately, yes. What we can say is that if you just follow attachment theory, it will help you understand why things become a problem. And but from the SSLD perspective, we're not only interested in analyzing what the problem is, we're actually more interested in making sure that people's needs are being met in relationships, and then they are also able to build relationships that are compatible not only with their needs but also with their own set of circumstances, characteristics, and capacity. And we also believe that if we learn the right strategy, then we will be basically targeting those needs and patterns. Say for example, if I am very insecure, right? Instead of saying that, okay, you're insecure and then that's why you become possessive and all that, and then you drive your partners away. In the SSLD system, we're asking, how can I become a more secure person? What will be helpful to build up a sense of security, a positive self-image, so that I achieve a certain level of self-advocacy and I'll be able to do the things that I want. And I will also have to learn how to develop a healthy interaction pattern to communicate my needs and my vulnerabilities effectively with my partner, and how do I develop a capacity to do the same for my partner who may be equally insecure, more or less secure than I am. That is what SSLD is interested in.
So in session 2, we had the opportunity to touch on social scripts and how they integrate into kind of the prototype of our lives. But here, we're going to get into some more common relationship scripts. Is that right?
Yeah, in a way, yes. Because scripts can be looked at from multiple angles. In the earlier sessions, we talk about scripts people going through a certain sequence, boy meets girl, courtship, engagement, marriage, divorce, and all that. So that is one way of looking at script. We also look at scripts from the perspective of whether it is sort of the dominant heteronormal script, or we have alternate scripts, people involved in alternate lifestyles, people from the queer community, coming up with alternate constructions. So yeah, we have dealt with many scripts. So then today we're going to talk more about specific dimensions or elements in some of the scripts, and you may find these elements in multiple scripts. So for instance, there is this idea that I refer to as the natural imagination, which is sort of a biased take on things. You probably have heard about people talking about something being natural, spontaneous versus something being, planned, staged, contrived, right? So we seem to prefer things that are, natural, so to speak. But what we want to invite people to think about today is what is natural.
Right.
Right? So what do you think of when someone say that something is natural?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind, especially in the context of a relationship, is the idea of maybe the love interest kind of just starting this conversation with you, and it's funny and it's intriguing, and they don't know anything about you, but all of a sudden you're able to connect on this almost primal level, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's actually quite interesting because when people use language like falling in love, right? So it is sort of like you're drawn by some gravitational force, right, that is beyond yourself, and you do not plan to fall into something, right? So it is like something that just happened, and it is like it overwhelms you, which is actually the kind of feeling that a lot of people have, and it is a great feeling. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it is like not good or not desirable. What I'm trying to get at is like when we are very preoccupied with natural, we sort of like sometimes neglect the fact that the very concept of natural is also socially constructed. So the concept of natural itself is not really natural. Like I always use this example when I'm talking to kids or like, younger people. Like when you see like beavers or birds or bees building structures around themselves, like building dams or beehives or nests, we consider them natural. And when human beings build something, then all of a sudden it is not natural, right? So it is actually quite interesting when you come to like see the world in this way, like and we have to recognize that like we have sort of like make the assumption that whatever we do, we are ourselves not part of nature. So what we do and what we build is not natural. And then like for some other species to be like building stuff, then it would be natural. So I think this is like an important awareness. And then of course, like what is considered natural now, right? It is like natural for certain people to be like, say for example, eating animals that we do not eat. But we almost would be shocked and like totally disgusted by such practices and consider that like barbaric or like subhuman almost. So like our idea of what is natural is socially constructed. This is like one thing that I really want to emphasize.
Okay, so you're suggesting that having a good game plan will ultimately help us to kind of be more spontaneous if we want to be, right?
Yeah, I think that's what I meant. Think of it like in more detail. When you go through your game plan, like you become more aware of your own needs, your own circumstances, your own characteristics, which would include your personality, your history, and your vulnerabilities. So you become more self-aware. And then we also talk about capacity. And capacity is very important. Like using the same, analogy again. If you're like more confident in yourself, if you have better skills, right? When you go skiing or playing hockey, you're going to be able to enjoy it more because you can like take on, more challenges. That you're more prepared to deal with like uncertainties or like sudden happenings. So the capacity actually allows you to be like more spontaneous. So as you can see, if you go through a game plan, it is actually a self-reflection process. And when you've done that, right, it will have two advantages. One is that you will become better able to communicate your situation to your partner so that like he or she can understand like why you sometimes like neurotic and like insecure. That makes it more manageable for the partner. The other advantage is, of course, you can have like a better understanding when your partner is sharing similar challenges or difficulties with you. So like the two parties will go into a relationship with sort of like a more open mind and capacity for engaging with each other's vulnerabilities and specific needs, which I think is very helpful for the development of a relationship. The interaction, the communication can actually be enhanced. And if we put all this together, right, my sense is that like the person having been through an SSLD process of planning and thinking through will be way better equipped to move into a relationship and flow with it, take on challenging situations, and be himself or herself, more authentic and spontaneous.
So this natural imagination concept is one of those assumptions that we really need to watch out for. Are there other common assumptions that we should be mindful of?
Yeah, the other one that I would like point out is like what I sometimes refer to as the one myth. Like, so we always feel that there is like one person out there for each one of us, and like when we're trying to build a relationship, we're going to like track that one person, and we want to be developing a relationship with that one person. I think it works well for people who are like really into like a monogamous, lifelong relationship kind of script, right? But then like my sense is that like for most people now, in an increasingly globalized environment, you probably would have like come across more than one person in your lifetime that you would be building an intimate relationship with, and it is like not uncommon in our life to see people who are simultaneously attracted to more than one person. Obviously, like I do not want to be making any like moral judgment or decision for people, and if that is your chosen script, that is fine. But I would invite you to at least reflect on this. Like, why do I choose this? Like, is it the only possible arrangement? I obviously would argue no, right? But then the thing is, like, when you have that, like, you think there is this one person who's almost destined to be your partner, and then you try to find this person, chances are you will be like missing out and not paying adequate attention to what you really need, who you really are, and like back in the SSLD language system, we'll be talking about, you know, how about your own N3Cs and as it matching with this other person's N3Cs. The other thing, of course, is like people change, and then like as you go through life together, like you may both be growing and developing and become better persons, but like you just become better persons who are different and less compatible, right? Then like you may then have to renegotiate the relationship and go through what we call a transformation phase, which is not always a bad thing, you know. So this is like the other assumption that we want people to at least re-examine. Like, you don't have to give up this, but like I think you would be better served if you have gone through the thinking and given yourself the reason, like that this is why I've chosen this. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely imagine some people who follow that one myth really get stuck, right? I mean, if they, you know, they lose that person that they always identified as that one person for them, then maybe they're not opening themselves up to new experiences later on, or kind of really having a more negative outlook on the world, right?
Yeah, but then, you know, like society is also like, well, at least like mainstream North American society is sort of like organized around this idea, and so people have like very strong opinions on behaviors that are considered like, say, cheating, you know, like and people think that, well, like while you're in one relationship and you feel attracted to another person, it is like sort of like an ethically problematic thing to do and to experience. And I just want to point out that, well, first of all, it happens all the time, and then the other thing is that, like, you know, people do change, and then when you feel that you're attracted to another person, you may actually be discovering something inside of yourself, and like you may also be discovering some unmet needs that you might have, and you just have to be honest and deal with it. I'm not saying that like every time you see someone attractive, you should like you know, give up your existing relationship and then pursue another one. But like I think being honest and being aware would be very important.
Yeah, it definitely offers an opportunity for that self-reflection and growth. Are there some other kind of assumptions that can be tricky if we start to follow?
Yeah, like one of the things that is sort of like connected to this, like the one myth, is like the belief in destiny, or like, you know, like serendipity, and you know, this is like an interesting dimension, I would say, of life, because life is actually consists of like things that we know, things we can predict and control, and things that we don't, right? So there are like always chance and doubt and uncertainty in life, and being able to embrace that is important. But then, like if we are leaving everything to chance, leaving everything to fate, right, or serendipity, or destiny, or will of God, or whatever, we need to recognize that like we are responsible for our own actions, and we are very often, going through a process that are making us who we are. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that who we are as persons is a result of the decisions we make and the actions we took early in life. So the key point here is that like we understand that we are taking actions, we are making decisions all the time, and these lead to consequences, and we just have to recognize that.
Serendipity is the belief that everything happens for a reason. This is often referred to as destiny or God's will. This viewpoint can potentially result in one taking on a less proactive stance in his or her life or relationship, instead choosing to leave things to chance. It is important to acknowledge our own self-determination. Each of us must accept a certain degree of responsibility for our own actions and the consequences that these actions lead to.
Okay, so let's say we take into this idea of being more proactive in our relationships. If we take this idea into account, maybe you can give some examples of how else this could be helpful in a relationship.
Yeah, one example that I can think of is like when we become like more proactive and assume more responsibility for our own decisions and actions, is that we can probably deal with this a very common problem in relationships, especially intimate relationships, that I call the mind reading fantasy. So what is mind reading fantasy? That you expect your partner to be able to read your mind. So before you even say something, he or she will be doing this for you. You do not have to say something, and then like he or she should be able to like understand almost intuitively, and then like take care of the situation of your needs. When you think differently, right, then you will not be blaming someone for like how can you not know that I don't want this, right? How can you not know that this is what I preferred? Instead of saying that you're like taking responsibility. If I want something, if I prefer something, do I not have the responsibility to communicate to this person? Maybe you don't really like the aesthetics of like explicit, direct, concrete communication, but you can still try. Like, can I not like write a poem, right? Draw a painting or whatever? Like, I want to communicate and help this person understand, and I would not just like sit there and sit here and assume and expect this person to automatically read my mind. So I would say that is another example. Like if you're more proactive, then you don't fall into the trap of like this mind reading fantasy.
So maybe next time I'll paint a picture of a slice of pizza for my partner, and that way I can kind of more explicitly show him what I want without him having to guess.
Okay, all right, that's a good example. Like, and I believe like the two of you can probably like keep on doing that and come up with like even more creative ideas. That would be wonderful. Yeah.
I'll invite you to the gallery opening.
Yeah.
All right, so what I'm hearing is sort of on the individual level, we have these patterns of attachment from early life that kind of follow us. And then on a broader level, there's these social scripts that we also follow. But then everything kind of sounds predetermined. So where's that spontaneity or like following your heart? Like, is there still a place for that?
Well, I would say yes, of course, because like life would be like too boring, without those. Uh, what we want to use as an analogy is that, like, say for example, you're up for some fun moments like playing hockey or skiing. What we are saying is that like you have to learn the basic skills, and then you also have to equip yourself with the right gear that like fit your body, your size, and your needs, and then you can go in and have fun, right? And then like you can ski and and have fun and be spontaneous and follow your heart. But like if you do not do that and just like jump in without like paying attention to this like details, there's a huge chance that you would first not have fun, and then there's a very real possibility that you can get like severely hurt. So that I think is the analogy we use. Uh, Back to the relationship situation, uh, our thinking is that like if you have like spent some time reflecting on yourself, understanding your own needs and circumstances, characteristics, and capacity, and you know what you're looking for in a relationship, and you have sort of like learned the basic skills for like communicating, interacting, building relationships, you would actually be more capable um, to get into situations where you can be spontaneous, because you can then trust yourself. Like I can just like sit down and relax and have a conversation, and I know it will turn out well. So that is like the kind of self-efficacy or a sense of ease that we want to establish in people, so that they can really be like going in there and flow and enjoy the relationship.
Okay, so you're suggesting that having a good game plan will ultimately help us to kind of be more spontaneous if we want to be, right?
Yeah, I think that's what I meant. Um, like we use this like hockey and skiing example, right? But when you think of it like in more detail, when you go through your game plan, like you become more aware of your own needs, your own circumstances, your own characteristics, which would include your personality, your history, and your vulnerabilities. So you become more self-aware. And then we also talk about capacity, and capacity is very important. Like using the same analogy again, if you're like more confident in yourself, if you have better skills, right? When you go skiing or playing hockey, you're going to be able to enjoy it more, because you can like take on more challenges. That you're more prepared to deal with like uncertainties or like sudden happenings. So the capacity actually allows you to be like more spontaneous. So as you can see, if you go through a game plan, it is actually a self-reflection process. And when you've done that, right, it will have two advantages. One is that you will become better able to communicate your situation to your partner, so that like he or she can understand like why you sometimes like neurotic and like insecure. That makes it more manageable for the partner. The other advantage is, of course, you can have like a better understanding when your partner is sharing similar challenges or difficulties with you. So like two parties will go into a relationship with sort of like a more open mind and capacity for engaging with each other's vulnerabilities and specific needs, which I think is very helpful for the development of a relationship. The interaction, the communication can actually be enhanced. And if we put all this together, right, my sense is that like the person having been through an SSLD process of planning and thinking through will be way better equipped to move into a relationship and flow with it, take on challenging situations, and be himself or herself, more authentic and spontaneous.
Hello everyone, welcome to this section. We're going to explore the process of developing your game plan based on the strategies and skills learning and development as a Saudi system. Even though we emphasize on how to develop your game plan, but don't forget we don't always need a game plan in order to have a successful relationship. My name is Teresa Lau. I'm a student at the University of Toronto, a research assistant in the SSLD team, as well as a curious and passionate learner like you. In this section, we'll be learning how to design our relationship game plan together. But before we start, we need to be aware of the social script. Social script is some form of unspoken rules in social interaction which may interfere in our relationship building process, even without us self-noticing. Not following a social script may result in negative consequences. However, it's not necessary to follow a social script. It isn't necessary to follow social script. We can always design our own script, as we all have different N3C, needs, circumstances, characteristics, and capacity. We need to have a plan that can suit our N3Cs. If you want to know more about N3C, please visit our course materials. We can't emphasize more on how your decision shapes your game plan. In this section, you are going to embark a journey of making your game plan, which consists of 3 dimensions: who, where, and how. Let's talk about who first. Who will you deem as a good match for you in a relationship? Do they have to share similar values and interests, or similar culture or religious background, or similar education or professional level? And more importantly, do they have to understand your needs? There are quite a lot of questions you need to ask yourself, and we obviously have different answers. Physical appearance may matter more to one person than to the other. Some may look for people who belong to a particular social group. All these questions are pointing towards one direction. Do you have any preference when it comes to relationship? If you ever wonder what social characteristics are, examples include age, social status, wealth or income, education, occupation, ethnicity, and relationship status. While physical appearance and social characteristics are factual and easy to discover, one's personality can take a longer time to fulfill. While you have some sort of preference in relationship building, don't forget that preference can be seen as prejudice. On the other hand, preferences are understood as one's characteristics in the SSLD system. So, in the SSLD system, preferences are considered as your characteristics. For sure, we'll all have our unique characteristics. Are you someone who is uncomfortable with differences? Or are you someone who is open and curious about differences? For some of us who are more inclined to familiarity and predictability, they may prefer associating themselves with someone who is quite similar. But for those of us who are more open and curious about differences, they wouldn't mind taking risk and trying something new. There is no right or wrong. No matter which side you're in the spectrum, understanding your capacity to deal with differences is the most important key. As a matter of fact, there are always similarities and differences between two individuals. There is always difference between two individuals. Knowing your N3C gives you a better idea of who you want to be in a relationship with. But in general, there are some qualities we usually find in a good intimate partner. Someone who understands your needs and accepts who you are. Interested in you as a person and the things that you do. Supports you physically and emotionally. Other factors that may contribute to a good relationship include novelty, excitement, happiness, stability, and security. Aside from the who question, we always encounter another hectic question when initiating a date, the where question. Where should we go for a date activity? Does it need to be expensive, luxurious? Places where you go need not to be luxurious. Expensive gifts as well as deluxe dining experience are unnecessary too. Let's think of this situation. You don't go to a high-end restaurant that often and you don't understand how dining etiquette works, but you initiate a date night at a fine dining place anyways because you feel obliged to do so. What would most likely happen? You have a pretty high chance of screwing up something, which is embarrassing. Therefore, it's more important to pick a place that can bring out the best of yourself and showcase your personality than spending hundreds on dinner, flowers, and gifts. Speaking about space, we would also like to explore the difference between physical space and virtual space. While we always focus on physical space and relationship building, we can't undermine the importance of virtual space. Depending on your plan, whether it is going to a concert, cruising on a boat, or dancing in a jazz bar, consider a setting that will bring out the best of you. Virtual space emphasizes on our psychological and interpersonal space, which gives us another dimension when we are thinking about relevance of space in a relationship. Virtual space is significant and intimate. In the SSLD system, we emphasize on the uniqueness of everyone. You're not obliged to open up if you feel uncomfortable or threatening. Let's move on to the third part of this section, the how question. How to have a meaningful and effective way to engage with your significant other is one of the most commonly asked questions. Through the lens of the SSLD system, we're about to discover how you and your partner's emphases impact your relationship engagement. As we all have different needs and goals, we have different needs profiles even between couple. However, the compatibility of usual needs profiles plays a significant role in long-term viability of the relationship. It is because complementary needs profiles improve the chance of long-lasting relationships. However, perfectly complementary relationships are very rare. Negotiation is required in order to continue meeting each other's needs effectively. Aside from the compatibility of needs profiles, trust is another critical element in terms of relationship building, especially when one partner discloses information to another partner. Therefore, maintaining an open and safe environment is the cornerstone of building trust in a relationship. Also, engaging in shared activities can strengthen the bond between the couple. Seeking for some activities that interest both of you help build a stronger relationship. The process of engagement should lead to exchange of information as well as deeper understanding about each other. Nonetheless, engaging in shared activities does not automatically lead to deeper understanding if the couple is barely communicating. Shared experiences can play a highly emotional and significant role in our relationships, ranging from going on an adventure or just a romantic date night on Valentine's Day. These are the signifying acts that may foster positive effect, care, and love. Therefore, signifying acts are crucial in strengthening relationships. Also, sharing your core principles, ideas, and beliefs with your loved one makes a difference. It is because sharing is a form of communication that emphasizes mutuality. The breadth and the depth of sharing progress with the development of the relationship. Even though we just highlighted some elements of building an emotionally connected relationship, we understand others' fear of getting hurt or feeling rejected in such intensive relationship. In the SSLD approach, you do not have to follow the conventional relationship pattern if your current relationship status satisfies your needs. Let's try the following simulation exercise. In this exercise, try to apply the SSLD approach to this example about first date. Let's say you met someone who you found attractive and is able to satisfy your every C. You would like to initiate first date. What should you consider? These are just some of the concerns while initiating first date. Remember, relationship is not a one-size-fits-all item. Your game plan could consist of elements which are outside of the discussion we have today, and it is unnecessary to have a game plan either. This is all we have for today. I hope you enjoy this journey and have a better understanding of how the SSLD system adopts a different lens to decode relationship building. Thank you.
When we talk about relationships, it's hard not to mention about the popular online dating world. Did you know that in 2015, a quarter of Canadians have already tried online dating? A national survey from Match.com also revealed that 52% of single Canadians resolved to fall in love that year. And according to IBIS World, the online dating and related services in Canada has been growing by 6% per year since 2010. This shows an increasing popularity of people turning to online dating in recent years. A typical flowchart of online dating, as most of you are aware of, goes from first finding a match and initiating a conversation, which is also a way to look for things in common. Then it can go both ways. Some stay in a long-term relationship online without ever meeting. According to a research done by Pew Research Center, a third of people who have tried online dating have never actually gone on a date with someone they met using those services. That means that 1/3 of online daters have never turned their online activities into offline romance. But, majority-wise, people are very willing to meet the person offline. Daters are motivated to construct online versions of self that are attractive to potential romantic partners. Daters created profiles that reflected an ideal as opposed to actual self, reconciling their conflicting needs for positive self-presentation and accuracy. So what do people mostly lie about? According to a 2014 report by OkCupid, an online dating site, they found that height is one of the top 3 things American men lie about on online dating sites, while women are more likely to lie about their weight and build. People are 20% poorer than they say they are. The dating site also found that over 1/3 of the hottest photos on the site are a year old or more, and that 80% of self-identified bisexuals are only interested in one gender. On the other hand, online daters are also pressured to present themselves accurately because of the following. They run the risk of alienating potential partners if their online profiles are judged as too inaccurate upon meeting. Most people desire partners who will understand and appreciate them as they truly are, rather than an idealized version inconsistent with reality. Being honest is a cherished aspect of one's self-concept, and outright deception can challenge this self-view. That's just the beginning though, after putting up your profile online. If you're lucky, you'll soon find a match, which then comes the first date. That means your date is willing to meet up and give each other a chance to know each other better. The second date is a good sign too, because that usually means that things have gone well enough, and now it's a good time to really look at the compatibility and chemistry. The second date is really like your second first date, with the awkwardness behind you. So let me tell you a story of my friend. I've once encouraged him to try online meeting and see how things would go from there, but he seemed reluctant and said, "I think meeting people and getting to know someone is difficult and takes time, and online seems to be one more barrier to overcome." Actually, you'll notice that there's really no difference than going on dates with someone you met offline, such as a friend of a friend. You follow the general principles such as learning to listen, focusing on your expression and receptive skills, and deciphering each other's body language. All of these principles are, in fact, what's being taught throughout this course. We've already emphasized numerous times on how everyone has needs, and that you must understand your own needs to be able to know the type of relationships you should be engaged in. What your expected end result with meeting someone online is usually identical to when you meet someone in other ways. Also, it is important to know the person that you're interacting with and what their needs are, because you would also have to meet that person's needs in a relationship. In the end, there's really no difference in developing a relationship with someone you met online or offline. You simply follow the same scripts and game plan that you may have. Be sure to continue checking our course out on ways to manage your relationships. Good luck!
So when it comes to relationships, kind of like how do we start off with making a good impression? Like it seems like self-presentation is really everything, eh?
Yeah, and a lot of people, when they think of self-presentation, it seems like physical appearance is sort of at the forefront of everyone's mind. And, you know, really just how can I make myself be physically attractive?
Yes, I'm not gonna lie, I've spent a lot of time on YouTube looking at makeup contouring. Like I still don't understand what it is, but
Yeah.
people do it, and it's like crazy how much time people spend just trying to look good to impress others, right?
And, you know, selfies and sort of the obsession on social media with getting the perfect picture.
Yeah.
And
true.
sort of what does that achieve?
Right, and then what I was reading in the course content is really that as much as physical appearance plays a role, it's so much more than like our makeup and our clothes that we're wearing, like just our posture, or like our tone of voice, or if we're smiling, that kind of thing. Like that all plays a role too in everything.
Yeah, and I think there's such a big like physical appearance is just one small aspect out of so many different things. And if your physical appearance maybe doesn't match your attitude or your behavior or how you sort of express yourself towards other people, then how much does physical appearance really get you?
That's so true. Like I remember in high school how it was really cool to kind of act like you don't care, right? And have this look about you, like maybe be slouched over, or like, you know, have the bedhead look.
Yeah.
But it's like still it kind of comes down to making that first impression.
And you know, when you think about, you know, teenagers in high school and that look, it's like what was their goal? What were they trying to achieve with putting on sort of that attitude and that look? And it's like, you know, if the goal is to impress others, how is that achieving it?
And then I guess on top of that, who are those others? Is it their peers, or is it adults? Is it children, right? So I guess that also is so catered into the overall assessment of why they're doing what they're doing.
Right. And I think that's why I really agree with the point that the context and the goals of what you're trying to achieve should really reflect in your self-presentation.
It makes me think about one of my good friends who maybe objectively people don't necessarily find him to be so attractive in terms of his physical appearance, but in terms of his confidence and his abilities, kind of just the way he presents himself, that all really plays into how attractive he is to others. Like, he's so good at making friends, and he's never had a problem finding a romantic partner. And it totally comes down to some of those more positive feelings that one has about themselves.
Yeah, and I think just, we don't judge people just when we see them. And, maybe if someone was to see your friend, maybe they wouldn't automatically approach him based on first sight. But then if they were to interact with him or to be in a shared space with him, they'd be more likely to become friends or develop some sort of relationship or interaction even.
What most people pay attention to is physical appearance. It does have a role, but it is important to look at the whole picture. The viewpoints expressed by the course tutors are the following. 1. We have to pay attention to the context we are in. 2. Pay attention to the goal that we wish to accomplish, such as what impression we're trying to get or who are we trying to impress. And lastly, the kinds of relationship we want to build with the person we are interacting with. By considering the context and goal, we can manage how we present ourselves. Our presentation of self includes physical appearance, demeanor, projection of own personality, and confidence or presence.
So going back to that whole idea of becoming more self-confident, I guess there's different factors at play that can kind of help us reach that level of confidence. So, I mean, for me, a big thing was just a change in context, a change in environment. So going from high school, where I had one type of peer group, to university, where it was a very different peer group, really changed my feelings of efficacy and what I'm able to do. And that ultimately changed how I was able to kind of portray myself. Do you have other examples or factors that have contributed to self-efficacy, self-confidence?
Yeah, so I think environment is such a great example. And another thing is, I think just the body, because your body, aside from just its looks, can contribute so much. Just sort of your posture and how you carry yourself and how you greet people and your body language. And I remember watching, I think, a TED Talk about some people before they go into an interview, they stand in sort of a Superman pose with, their hands on their hips and their chest sort of held out. And that really has been shown to build self-confidence and to actually affect people's performance in an interview. So we've talked a lot about the importance of self-confidence and sort of not just focusing on your physical appearance, but also your body language and how you present yourself to others. And it's easy to say, it's important to be self-confident, but how do you go from there to actually believing you're self-confident and, having the thinking process and the cognitive, the cognitions to support that self-confidence?
Yeah, so just like you said, it's so important to really have that belief in yourself. So kind of a strategy that is used in order to enhance this self-confidence is the use of positive self-statements. So for example, maybe I were to go out, try to engage in romantic interactions with someone, and I'm flat out rejected. So I can sit there and think to myself, I'm a loser, I'm unattractive, all these things, or I can reframe it and literally think to myself, oh, well, you know what, I'm courageous that I just went out there and I tried, and I failed, but I'm gonna try again, and it, maybe the outcome will go better for me next time. And it's a really protective way to feel good about yourself, essentially, and really believe it.
Yeah, I hear that, and it's sort of that positive reframing of taking the negative in the situation and turning it into a positive. And I'm also thinking sort of in some situations when you're rejected. So say, for instance, your friend tells you that a dress doesn't look good on you because you've put on some weight. And before you can engage in that positive reframing, you're likely to experience so many negative emotions and just, this negative affect, and you're going to be feeling upset and rejected. And sort of how to go from that to the positive reframing.
Yeah, it's a good point, because, when something traumatic or upsetting happens, it's hard for us to really think logically. It's pretty important to take that time, right? Validate how you're feeling, and do what you need to do in order to feel better. So, I mean, if that means having some Haagen-Dazs or going dancing or, crying in your room for a night, then that's kind of what you have to do until you get to a more stable feeling and you can start to think about doing that positive reframing.
So it just sounds like taking the time to recognize that you're feeling a negative emotion, sort of letting it run its course, but then coming back to the situation and thinking what happened and how, and sort of putting a positive spin on the events.
Definitely.
So given sort of everything we've discussed in terms of self-presentation and self-confidence, I'm wondering if we can sort of bounce some ideas about maybe someone who's going on a first date and how to sort of go into it with self-confidence and to have a good experience.
Nice. Okay, well, right off the bat, I guess we could say that, sure, appearance matters to an extent, so sure, we want to go in looking good, and we also want to kind of portray that right body language, so how we're sitting and how we're kind of talking to the person. I guess those are pretty important factors going in.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think also sort of keeping in mind what your goal for the date is. So are you going just to have a fun time? Or are you going and you're hoping to meet a person who you're going to be seeing for a while or who you're going to be in a caring relationship with? And sort of how to match your physical appearance or your behavior or your body language to those goals.
That's so true, because based on what our goals are, it'll totally inform the conversation and the date and everything that goes on there. So that's such a good point. I guess for me, I would really think a lot about using those positive self-statements even before the date happens. So maybe if I tell myself the date's going to go well, or that I'm going to be witty and awesome, it might help to make that happen.
Yeah, almost like going in with internal glow of here's how this is going to go, and here's what I think is going to happen.
But I guess what if the person's feeling really nervous? Is there like a good way to frame that?
So I think maybe just validating and recognizing that, that I'm feeling nervous about this date. I don't know what's going to happen for sure. I know that these are my strengths going in, and I know that I'm probably going to be nervous throughout the date, but I'm still willing to do it, and sort of just sitting with that nervousness and not letting it get away with you.
Yeah, okay, yeah, and even taking it a step further and being like, oh, I guess I'm feeling nervous, so I must really care about this. Like, this must mean something to me, and kind of using it that way too. So kind of, just like you said, like making it into something positive.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of just recognizing that it is an important date for you, and also recognizing that a lot of people feel nervous, and the person you're going to be seeing is probably feeling nervous, just as nervous, maybe even more nervous.
From the discussions that the course tutors had, here are some of the key points to keep in mind for your initial contact with someone, or even for your first date. Your first impression is important, and can make or break your potential relationship with this person. Physical attractiveness does matter to a certain extent. Portraying a confident image through your body language and how you carry yourself can affect your first impression as well. And maybe you could try some positive reframing by encouraging yourself with positive self-statements instead of focusing on the negativity.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of session 2. Covered a lot. I really like the part about social scripts. It just kind of gives me a good starting point for really understanding what informs some of just society's decisions in life and kind of why we choose the paths that we choose. Okay, but moving forward, what do we have to look forward to in session 3?
Well, in session 3, we'll be like getting into the more practical stuff. We'll be like mainly dealing with how we're going to build a relationship. And we'll be like covering like 3 components. Actually, like the key component is communication, but we also will be breaking it down to what we call reception. That's how you listen, how you observe, how you get the correct message from the other person. And then the other part is like expression, how do you articulate, how do you express your own like ideas, feelings, needs and preferences. And then we'll come to talk about like how can we communicate effectively in order to build a good relationship.
So we are now in session 3, and Professor Tseng, I was wondering what we will be covering in this session.
Well, what we'll be doing mainly is focusing on the building blocks of relationships. And I would say that like the most important piece would be communication. And the way we look at communication is to do it like in 3 parts. The first part, like we deal with reception, how do we receive messages, make sense of the other person, make good observations and figuring things out. And then we talk about our own expression or presentation of our own ideas, feelings, needs, and all that to the other party. And then we will come back to look at like what actually happens when 2 individuals interact and how do we manage the interaction and the communication.
That sounds really interesting. And I'm sort of wondering, why are we starting with receptive skills?
Well, like, yeah, that's a very good question, because like most people, when they think of communication, and then a lot of people who are coaching people to learn to be effective communicators very often focus on like, what am I going to say, how am I going to say it, how do I present myself, and all that. But like when we come to relationships, I would have to say, because of my own very biased view, based on like many years of like counseling people with relationship problems, is that like not being able to listen, not being able to understand the other party is more often the more difficult issue to deal with. And in a lot of situations, people actually spend too much time and energy on like expressing themselves and getting their own way, and not like paying enough attention to the person that they're interacting with. So this is why in the SSLD system, we do it the other way around, and we focus on like building up like reception or receptive skills first.
So we will now be talking about receptive skills. And when reading the book, I noticed that both reception and expression sort of targeted 4 main content areas, and they were both the same. So they were facts, attitudes, emotions, and needs for both. And I'm sort of wondering why this similarity.
Okay, so first of all, we probably will have to explain why these 4 content areas of all the possible content areas are chosen, right? I would say that like this probably based on our experience helping people managing emotional issues. Very often, when people are trying to communicate, they want to establish facts. And then, but then we understand that facts are never totally objective. Like if you go to any
household and ask like who has done the biggest share of housework, you will not have the same answer from everyone. And if you ask a couple, about some simple facts like, are we spending enough time together, and you get like very different answers, because like facts are always colored and conditioned by our emotional needs and our attitudes, and sometimes we will be like sort of like constructing reality according to our needs and emotional state. So the reason why we put all this together is like we start off with like something that looks like it is like straightforward, objective, neutral, and help people appreciate that it is not always the case. And then from that onwards, we'll lead on to this idea that like whatever we are communicating, like we have to be paying attention to like the kind of attitudes that people have taken, the values that are weaved into the message, and very often emotions are important. And back to the SSLD core concept, like SSLD is always focused on needs, because like why do we even want to be communicating with each other? Because there is something that we need from that interaction, and there is something that we want to attain or accomplish in that conversation. So this is like why we have got these 4 content areas chosen.
As mentioned, the 4 key content areas that we should pay attention to when we are listening to others are facts, which can be subjective depending on your attitudes and emotions, and of course, the core concept of the N3C analysis, your needs. There's often something that we want to accomplish or attain when we engage in conversations, and that's because we have needs.
So in terms of the 4 key content areas for reception, could you sort of give an example to help me understand how using these content areas may help to understand other people or communicate with other people?
Okay, so let us take a real life example when like a couple is fighting. Like one person is saying this, like, you always blame me for our problems, and it is always me who is wrong, right? So when someone said something like this, very often people would be like obsessed with the facts. No, my dear, I didn't blame you. I never said that you're wrong. And then they spend an inordinate amount of time arguing whether he or she blamed him or her or not, right? Mm-hmm. So that is like being very focused on the facts. So as we suggested, like if you try to sort of like prove who is right and who has done more, usually is not very helpful. And being able to listen to this, not only paying attention to the facts, but like, so when she is saying this, what attitudes is she expressing? And more importantly, what is her needs, right? Mm-hmm. So actually, if we listen to that, then basically this person is communicating a few things. 1, I'm not happy. That is the emotional aspect. Mm-hmm. 2, attitude, values, right? I don't think blaming is a good thing, and I don't think that whenever you insinuate it or imply that like there's something wrong with me, that I'm responsible for the problem, that is a nice thing. I don't think so. Like, I don't like those. So that is what is communicated in this message. But if you just respond to those and say, okay, like I know you don't like being blamed, and I know you are feeling emotional, also wouldn't help. The key thing is to understand what needs are being expressed. So your partner is expressing the need to be understood, to be appreciated, right, to be valued. And your partner is also hoping that you will be entering into a more collaborative relationship, owning your responsibility and the role you play in the relationship. So if you respond by saying something like, yeah, I understand that like sometimes I'm too preoccupied with myself and I haven't been paying attention to your needs and your feelings, and I'm sorry if I gave you the impression that I'm blaming you for all our problems, which actually is not my intention. I'm sorry, but like, let us like try to work something together so that I can better respond to your needs and what you would want this relationship to look like. So that would be the kind of response that would be possible if you understand that the simple message, right, actually contains like different content areas, and you'll be able to address them appropriately. But if you do not understand that, you only selectively respond to one aspect of it, like, then it is unlikely to be helpful.
And it sounds like you need to sort of have an idea of all four to
Yep.
be able to respond in a comprehensive way.
Yeah, exactly.
So in terms of reception, if you're talking to another person and you're really trying to understand them, what are some of the things that you should be paying attention to?
Well, obviously, like the one thing that almost everyone will pay attention to is the factual content that this person is communicating. Like if someone is telling you about like oil prices or real estate prices going up or down, telling you about the weather, like you're paying attention to the facts, right? Actually, talking about the weather is a good example because, like, when people talk about the weather, they normally are not really talking about the weather. So this leads us to this, like, very important position that the facts are not always the most important aspect of the communication. But that is one of the things that most people without special training or education or learning would almost be automatically paying attention to. And this is also something that we have been learning since elementary school, right? So that is like one thing that people know, and we probably won't be like spending too much time on. But the other aspects of the communication, the other dimensions are the less obvious, right? Like emotional content, the kind of needs that people are trying to express. And there is a huge area that we can be exploring is like how people, by saying something, are actually communicating the positions that they're coming from. They may be also telling you about their values, their preferences, So those are the things that we want to be paying attention to.
So we kind of talked about how factual content is pretty straightforward and we learn about it throughout most of our lives.
Yeah.
What about like the underlying attitudes that people have when they say things? And how does that sort of affect our interpersonal understanding of others?
Well, like when people talk about facts, as we said, like they're not really only talking about facts. Like say, for example, even when people are talking about the weather in the elevator, there's a sort of like a communication of like I'm your friend, like I mean no harm, you can feel safe, all right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it can also be, I'm interested in talking to you, right? So so the facts, right, are rarely just facts. And then how facts are being presented and what facts are selectively used are also very important ways for people to be telling you something important about themselves. Right? Say, for example, when we have like someone trying to tell you about, marriage and divorce, right? And when someone says, oh, more and more people are getting divorced, right?
Yeah.
Which may or may not be factually accurate, depending on where you are, right? But when someone tells you something like that, like we want to be asking questions like, why is this person telling me this? What attitude is communicated? And if someone is saying that, well, like increased divorce rate indicates like social disintegration, that shows you this person's values and like this person's worldview. And if someone tells you that rising divorce rates means that more people are now exercising their agency and autonomy. When the relationship is not working, I walk out, and I'm not going to put up with like things that I don't tolerate, I don't enjoy. So there are like different ways of like using the same fact, right? So this is like how when we're listening for facts, we always ask like, why is it selected? What is this person talking about? Like you have a discussion of like minimum wage, for instance, right? Some people will say that like, this is going to hurt the economy. Then you will know that this person probably is speaking from the position of an employer, right? Or like someone who runs a business, like rather than from the position of an employee or like from like labor rights and interests, right? So you have things like that, and I can come up with like tons of examples. Like usually when people state the fact is like selected, and it is like stated with a purpose. So it is important for us to be able to decipher what kind of position the person is assuming, the purpose of like using this fact, what effect this person is expecting this utterance to have.
Yeah, so it sounds like the importance is not just what the fact is telling us or the fact itself, but it's why was that fact selected, and what is the person's kind of position on that particular fact.
Yeah, exactly. So especially when people were like thinking of like developing a more significant relationship, it is actually important to understand that, because like some people say for example they started building a relationship, and then like all of a sudden or at least to the person involved, like it comes on suddenly that, oh, like I never thought that this person actually values his or her family so much, and like to the extent that like I become sort of like this like added on piece to his or her life, because like to him or her like the family is like way more important than me or than this relationship. And when people like find themselves in this situation, and then when they think back, right, actually if, like maybe in the like 8 months that they were dating, this message has been communicated to this person like maybe like, I don't know, 800 times, right? But you just like missed it, right? So the person may be saying that, oh, like I have to do this like because his family, right? Or like like I'm not going to care like what is going to happen, like Thanksgiving, like I'm back to Calgary. So this is like the kind of like selective presentation or framing of facts, and if we do not listen between the lines, we're missing out the most important piece. Like if someone is telling you that like this Thanksgiving I have to go to New York or Calgary or wherever, it is not just a fact, right, that I'm doing it. It is also telling you this is important. This is what is important in my life. Right? Yeah.
Right, and it sounds like there's almost patterns that you can pick up with people based on how they present facts and how the kind of underlying attitudes and positions that they take.
Yeah. So yeah, like that takes us on to the other dimension. Like say for example, like you may sometimes hear like a couple fighting, right? And then someone will be accusing the other person. Oh, I never know that like this, whatever that is, like income or your looks or the size of your breast or whatever, is so important to you. But like very often, like when you think back on how this person talks about other persons, like this is what we call characterization, right? Is telling you a lot about what is important to this person. Like say for example, you have this person who is telling you about his or her friends, and every time he mentions someone he or she knows, it will always be referring to like this person's profession, income. That means to this person like professional status and income are important. Or if someone is telling you about his or her friends, like it's constantly referring to this person's like physical features, height, hair color, body shape. So that also tells you that like to him or her, these are important. If someone tells you about someone, it's always where this person comes from, right? Which country, right? Or ethnicity, or religion, right? For that matter. Then that tells you more about this person than the people that this person is talking about. So give you one example. Like if I tell you that, Jane is such an animal lover, right? That means animal lover is a label that has significance for me, right? And for another person, it would not be animal lover. To another person, Jane is such a music lover, right? So when I tell you something about Jane, I'm actually telling you something about me. So this is like what we refer to as like the characterization frame.
Right. And I guess then in like what a person tells you, it can also sort of affect how they're seeing you, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. Like if I'm referring constantly to these dimensions, well, you're right. Like I may actually be using the same parameters or the same dimension in my assessment of you, who you are, and your value as a human being, as a friend. I may actually be referring to this. Like say for example, if I think that education is very important, and then like I'm interacting with someone who is like less educated. If I keep referring to people's educational credentials and background, you have a sense that where do I stand?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, so I guess that sort of answers this question, but what is the benefit of sort of being able to pick up on something like that in your interactions with individuals?
Well, I would say that most people actually are able to do that. Like what we are trying to say here is like to basically draw your attention to those different dimensions. So when we are listening to people, we understand that like we shouldn't be just paying attention to facts. We know that there are like other dimensions as well, and if we pay attention to those dimensions, and sometimes when we ask the question like why is this person saying this, right? It will actually help us to gain a more in-depth understanding of what the other person is up to.
Right. Yeah. Now, just sort of moving on to emotional content. I'm wondering how important is the underlying emotion of what people are communicating?
Well, I think from our experience, and I think there is also some research in support of this, the emotional content very often is like more important than the factual content. And like say for example, when like a couple is fighting, and then one person is telling the other person, "Oh, so you are the most wonderful person in the world." So if you take the factual content, right, it will be exactly opposite to the emotional content, right? The actual emotional message is like you are an awful, lousy person who thinks that like he or she is the most wonderful person in the world, right? So by saying this, right, like the literal factual meaning and the emotional content would be like totally opposite. So it is really important for us to be able to decipher messages, and the reason why some people are using this kind of expression that I just simulated is that emotional expressions are actually heavily regulated in society. Society encourages certain kinds of expression of emotions. It is okay for you to express sadness, for example, but it is less okay for you to express jealousy, anger, right? It is okay for you to express like joy, but then it is like very difficult for you to express, say, for example, sexual feelings, right? and it would be considered inappropriate. Actually, out of like all these human feelings and emotions, like expression of sexual feelings is actually the most heavily regulated. Because like you can easily imagine, if you act on your anger and actually attack someone, then like someone will be trying to do something about it, right? Like people will try to prevent you. But if you're just saying that I'm very angry at you, I'm very mad at you, that is like really well tolerated, right? But for someone to tell another person that he or she is like sexually interested in that person in some context, that statement itself, that expression itself, constitutes like violation of some important rules, right? So you see, like different feelings are being regulated very differently in society. So this is why we've learned to not express certain emotions or try to control them, right? So this is why like we have passive aggression, right? We have passive aggression because like explicit active expression of aggression is regulated, right? And this is like why we have like people insinuating or like issuing like pseudo sexual messages, because explicit communication of sexual messages, right, can get you in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And this is like why people have like developed the entire art of flirting, right, which is like trying to express sexual interest within socially tolerable parameters. So that's like like because the expression of like feelings and emotions are regulated, and we have to understand when we move from one social context to another. What conventions are in place in that culture or in that subculture, so that our expressions of emotions would be appropriate within that context.
Yeah, and it sounds like although some emotions are very regulated, people are still obviously feeling those emotions. So what are some of the ways that like we can pick up on what emotions are being communicated?
Well, first of all, of course, like if like people were directly expressing their emotions, like verbally, that would be easy, right? But then we also know that like sometimes when people verbalize their emotions, they're not really expressing it. They're trying to verbalize in order to hide, right?
Yeah.
So like what they tell you that they're feeling, oh, I'm perfectly happy, I'm okay, like I'm absolutely thrilled, right? And then you can sense that like that's not this person's feeling. So I think observation of the person's like facial expression, tone of voice, those are actually more important. They're probably in many cases more reliable indicators of a person's emotions. The other thing that we do is we infer from what they do, and we infer from their expression. Like, say for example, I work with like older people a lot, right? And I work with people who are diagnosed with dementia. And then very often when you look at their behavior, like their energy level, their activity level may tell you more about what they say. And like very often, because especially when you're in a long-term care situation and you ask people, are you happy? Are you happy here? Sometimes it can be like almost oppressive and abusive. I have been in situations when you go to a home and then the staff would want to impress the visitors that the residents are happy. So they will be asking this question in front of the visitor. Are you happy here, Mrs. Smith? And then like this old lady would say, yes, I'm very happy here. But like you can see that like it really isn't, right? So the thing is like sometimes you have to infer from their nonverbal communication, the way they carry themselves, and what they do.
So in reception, the ability to listen is really important, but also the ability to understand the other person. I'm wondering if you could sort of comment more on that.
Yes, of course. An important experience that I have like over the last 10, 12 years is that like I go to different places and talk to people about relationships, and I've very often ask the audience the same question, or ask them to indicate how many people in your life do really understand you, especially with regard to your needs. And I think the general impression that I've got is that like very few people would indicate that they have like 5 persons or more who can do that. Most people have like only 1 or 2. And there's actually a large number of people saying that like I don't really have anyone in my life who really understands me and understands my needs. So it shows us how important it is. Like if you can become the person who can understand another person well, especially with regard to that person's need, you are already in a very special position to develop a significant relationship with this person, right? So this is like why we really want to be emphasizing that like understanding is so important, because we understand that when you have achieved this kind of like understanding, the other person feels understood, and you know exactly what his or her needs are, trust will develop, right? And it will be like a very important condition for a good relationship.
The ability to listen and to understand the other person's need is very important. If you're able to understand someone else's need, you're already in a significant position of that person's life, as not many people actually do understand the needs of others. Trust will develop in this way, and that's why having good receptive skills is an important condition of a healthy and good relationship.
So in terms of reception, we've already talked about how important it is to sort of decipher what people are saying when they talk about facts, their attitudes and their positions, and their underlying emotions. And I guess what's sort of left to talk about is needs. But I sort of have a sense like we've been talking about needs and learning about needs throughout the course up until now.
That's very true. Like needs is such a central concept in SSLD. So I guess like what we may want to focus on now within this context, when we're talking about reception, how can we be like more effective in like understanding the other person, what is this other person trying to communicate, is to sort of like ask the question, how do we find out, right, about needs? So one of the things, of course, is like if the person is telling us like what he or she needs. Like sometimes people confuse what they want with what they need. Like we have been through these examples before. Like I want to have like a luxurious designer item, but I don't really need that. I actually need self-esteem and affiliation, social approval, acceptance. So when we trying to figure out like what the other person needs, one of the things is to look at like what this person is trying to achieve, right? And infer from there. Like say, for example, people come to university to do graduate degrees. What do they need? What are they trying to accomplish, right? And actually people come to do the same thing for very different reasons. Some people may be driven by need for achievement. Some people actually didn't know what to do, and it is sort of like the socially acceptable, right, arrangement for them to like do nothing and figure things out. Some people come to graduate school because their boyfriend or girlfriend is here, right? So we have like, and then some people have like very clear career objectives. So we have like all sorts of people apparently doing the same thing, but like needing different things. Very often when we want to figure out what another person needs, is to ask the question, what would make you feel better? Right. So this is actually a very helpful question that we encourage people in couple counseling to ask. Sometimes, like couples got stuck in a situation, and then you have like one person being very emotional or depressed or angry, and the person is not trying to be nasty to another person. Like he or she has difficulty even understanding his or her own needs. So instead of like asking, so what's that you want from me? We ask, honey, what will make you feel better? right? So that is like a different way of like trying to get at like what people's needs might be. And then the other thing, of course, is like you can infer by the person's complaint. If someone is like I'm trapped here, like bored to death, so this person might need activity, stimulation, you know, like happenings, you know, something out of his like boring routine. So that is like by looking at what one is complaining, we infer what the person's needs might be. And then there are like also people who are telling us about what they are afraid of. And when they're afraid of something, when they it can be like a fear of flying, or you know, afraid to take chance, or like people with like severe social anxiety. So when you get to that situation, so like why are you so afraid? Like you know, like I'm afraid of like rejection. I'm afraid of embarrassment, and we reframe that like, so what does a person who is afraid of embarrassment need, right? The person needs some assurance, right? Some protection, some security, and maybe like a clear perception of the incremental steps that this person can take so that he or she can move from like withdrawn, isolated position to gradually open up and build up relationship with other people. So, so that's another way to figure out what people's need might be. And then sometimes you can actually find out about a person's need by looking at what this person is avoiding. Like in relationships, sometimes we think of certain people as, oh, like this person is constantly avoiding commitment or avoiding intimacy. So when someone is avoiding intimacy or commitment, what does this person need, right? So like this person is avoiding commitment because this person need to have the options, need to have like the freedom to change his mind or her mind, right? And to pursue spontaneous like plans or like spontaneous reactions. So there are certain things that are important or valuable to this person, and this person doesn't want to be giving those up. So there is something that this person needs. And then we ask the question of why are those options so important? So does it pertain to a sense of self, or does it pertain to a sense of mastery and control over the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it like a reaction against like some early childhood trauma that makes this person feel insecure in a sort of like committed, tied down situation, right? So these are like various ways that we use to try to figure out what another person's needs might be.
In this lecture, we've covered a few ways to find out what the other person's needs are, and these are the questions that you can ask. 1. What are they trying to achieve? 2. What could make them feel better? 3. What are their fears? 4. What do they always complain about?
In your book, you talk about how one way to make sense of people's attitudes and opinions is to take a look at their attributional frame. I'm wondering if you can sort of explain what that is.
Well, yeah, like when people like experience something, see something, they usually will make some attribution that's trying to explain it or trying to point out or find out what the cause of what we are experiencing might be. So, like I'm an immigrant in this country. So when I remember when I first came to this country, and people were blaming the immigrants for like driving up like housing prices, and then like it's so interesting that like within the same newspaper that I read, right, on the same day, there were like another commentary saying that, oh, you know, like this neighborhood is now like having a lot of immigrants coming in, there's minorities, and it is like driving the real estate prices down, right? So you can always attribute something, right, to something like whether it is like factually true or not. And then like obviously when I was like going through that, I was going, okay, all right, when you say that the immigrants driving up the real estate prices, so who are paying the high prices? It would be the immigrants, like who are getting those high prices, right?
Yeah.
The people who are selling the real estate, right? So why is it a problem? So, but then like you can very often see people, right, making attributions like that. And then very often we also make attributions in relationships. Right? Say, for example, like in a breakup situation, like people would try to figure out, oh, so why are we breaking up? Why is she or why is he leaving me? And people usually want to attribute it to something simple, right? So like, oh, he is leaving me for a younger woman, right? So, and you're attributing it to age, right? And when you are saying that like he doesn't need my financial support anymore, right? So you're attributing it to like a financial reason for this relationship breakup. So this may or may not be true. We don't know, right? But my general approach to this is that when someone tells you something, right, the person is always like attributing. Attribution is sort of something that we constantly do, right? So whenever you ask the reason why, when you ask the reason for like a decision to be made or an action to be taken, there is always attribution involved, and this is like important for us to be able to figure this out.
Here's a definition of the concept introduced in this lecture. Attribution. It's when one is regarding something as being caused by something else. This can happen in any situation when you try to explain the cause of an experience, whether it is factually true or not. For example, let's say a couple has broken up and the man is now with a much younger girl. You might think that he left a previous partner for a younger woman and attributing the cause of their breakup to age.
It sounds almost like a way of sort of simplifying the world, or like simplifying a situation for yourself to understand.
Well, yeah. I think that is a good way to put it. Like most people actually are seeking simple attributions, but what we're advocating in SSLD is that we are into this multiple contingencies thinking, meaning that like we recognize that most human realities are more complicated than like a simple one-to-one relationship, right? So when a relationship breaks down, it's normally not just like because of one reason, right? It is usually because of multiple reasons. But sometimes we make attributions simple, well, because like it takes time and energy to deal with like more complicated attributions. Two is that the kind of attributions people choose are actually more often related to their own needs. Like I make attributions that will make me feel better, or I make attributions that is more consistent with my view of the world. I say, for example, if I am a xenophobic person, I really do not like to see this like immigrants or people who are different in my neighborhood. So when anything goes wrong, I would just say, okay, this is because of these people who are different, right? That is causing my discomfort. And we find it all the time. Like say, for example, if you see like a black person, right, doing something violent, you attribute it to the race, right? But when we look at like global statistics, right, on violence, then we find that like it is not really race. It is like Asian gender, like young men, right, are more likely to be violent than like any other demographic combination, right? But then like in a context like North America, we are more likely to be attributing it to ethno-racial characteristics, which might be totally irrelevant in another context. But like that is like sort of a very common attribution that we make. And of course, like when people make this kind of attribution, we sometimes would refer to that as an attribution error, right? Because it's not accurate.
Of course.
In SSLD, we believe in multiple contingency thinking, meaning that the cause of something cannot be explained by just one simple attribution, and there are usually many other underlying factors. For example, there are actually multiple reasons of a relationship failure, rather than a simple attribution that we tend to make. People make simple attribution because it takes time and energy to deal with the more complicated ones, and we tend to make attributions that would make us feel better.
And I guess, is an attribution always a response to an underlying need?
Well, I would say that in most cases, but in some cases it can all just be a habit,
Okay.
right? Because making simple attributions, as I said, like consumes less energy, right? So to a lot of people, I just do not have like that much psychological energy to put into this and think about this carefully and like consider this in like multiple dimensions. It would be just like easier for me to say, okay, this is like how it works. And that actually, like later on when we have a chance to look at how research is done, like we will find that even like research scientists are making the same mistake. We try to come up with like very simple answers, and we ask very simple questions. Like one example that I can sort of talk about here, and then later on in this course, hopefully we'll have a chance to look into this with in more detail. It's like very often people are interested in the idea of like, who are the people who are attractive, right? What makes people attractive? And when you ask a question like this, right, you're asking first of all a very simple question. It's an oversimplified question, and then people come up with like simple answers, like if you're tall, you're blonde, or you're handsome, or you're white, or you're young, or whatever, you're more attractive than people who are not blonde, who are like darker skinned, or who are older or whatever. So that is like a simple attribution. Right? You try to explain interpersonal attraction by referring to a very simple factor or variable. And then the one question that we do not ask is like, you are attractive to whom, for instance, right? So like what you find attractive may be very different than what I find attractive. So the reference group is again like overly simplified and homogenized or standardized. So like when we start asking like a more nuanced or more complex set of questions, we obviously will have to spend more time, finding the answers, right? So this is why like a lot of people just like, okay, like it's simple, like if you're taller, you're more attractive. If you're blonde, you're more attractive. That make life simpler, but like this is actually an attribution error, and seeking answers in this way, in my opinion, is not even the best way to do research.
Yeah. So it sounds like in order to build more trust and to build better relationships, understanding the other person is really vital. And so I'm wondering how to build that understanding and those skills at understanding other people.
Well, like in North America, I think the emphasis is on listening, right? So you listen carefully to the other person, what the other person is saying. This is a very verbal culture, and then like we privilege the spoken word. But I have to say that like careful listening is important, and this is why we have like identified these different content areas like facts, attitude, like emotions and needs. But I also want to emphasize that like we do not only gain understanding through listening. If we pay attention, we observe to what other people are doing, right? People sometimes can express their feelings and very significant emotional state through other channels than like talking. One of the concepts that I really want to introduce is the concept that I call signifying acts, which simply refers to acts or actions that we take that signify something, right? I'll give you an example. Like in some cultures, it is not appropriate for parents to apologize to their children if they've done something wrong. So say, for example, you have like a 4-year-old walking down the hall and like inadvertently like kicked off the power line to her dad's computer, right? And the dad yelled at her and
you know. And then like he immediately felt bad, you know, like I shouldn't be doing this to my 4-year-old. But then like maybe in his culture, like apologizing might not be the best thing to do. This person might then go up to his daughter and say, "Hey, you know, you're interested in like taking a walk in the park, and, like getting some ice cream, right?" That is sort of like an indirect way of saying, "I'm sorry, that shouldn't have like yelled at you," right? That is considered a signifying act. And one of the stories that I really like sharing, and I actually had it in the book, right? Is that like we have this like story from West China, like rural mountainous area. We have this girl who was betrothed to be married to a wealthier peasant because like her family was broke. She absolutely didn't want to get married to this guy, and her plan actually was to commit suicide on her wedding night. Before the wedding, she actually fell in love with another person. She was caught in a very difficult position, and then like she had this like filial obligation to her father. So before she got married, what she did was like she walked down this like mountainous area. It was like about 10 kilometers like walk in this like mountainous terrain to go to the Yellow River and get a bucket of water to take it home to wash her father's feet. So that is like nothing was spoken, like not a single word, but it's a very intense, profound expression of emotion. Right? So this is like what I mean by signifying acts. So being able to accurately decipher or decode signifying acts is a skill that we all need to learn. And then what I try to point out earlier with these various examples is that like this signifying acts carry different meanings across different cultural contexts. So what works in North America may not apply well like in South America or in Africa or in Asia. So a certain cultural understanding is also important for us to be able to understand or receive these messages correctly.
So you've talked about signifying acts like bringing someone flowers or slamming a door and how they can actually represent underlying emotions. I'm wondering if there are differences between cultures in the types of signifying acts that they have.
Oh yeah, certainly. Like say for example, like bringing flowers as an expression of affection or friendship here in North America in most situations, and we have actually elaborate rules regarding like when to bring flowers to home and what does it mean. Like it can be like bringing flowers to someone who's in the hospital. You can be like bringing flowers on Valentine's Day. But then like those are sort of like generally well understood within this culture. Or in some other cultures, like expression of affection is never done through bringing flowers. It may be done like through doing someone a favor or bringing food, right? And slamming doors might be like an effective expression of like dissatisfaction or anger. But like you easily can imagine, like in many parts of the world, doors are not really a common physical reality, right? So there's no door for you to slam. So yeah, so there are like obviously cultural differences like with all this, and then like different cultures also like have like very strong rules on certain things that like here in North America we do not pay as much attention to. One thing that I can think of is gender difference. Right here, say for example, like hugging is a way to express like friendship, connection. But if you're going to a gender segregated culture, that is like tabooed. Right? I remember I was actually taken off a car on the subway in Dubai, right, like to another car because like that car was reserved for women and children, like, and I like went on that by mistake, and because I was a visitor, so I was like sort of like treated like politely. I imagine if you're a local person and people expect you to understand and respect that rule, I think the reaction would be like slightly different. So, yeah, like so when we move from one culture to another, we have to be very careful and pay attention to this like cultural differences.
I know also that yourself as well as others have sort of criticized the cultural literacy approach, especially in psychotherapy and social work, and you've criticized the sort of cultural homogeneity assumption. How does that sort of relate to this?
Yeah, I'm glad that you're raising this. Well, like we have been like criticizing the cultural literacy approach, which basically recommends that like when you're working as a psychologist, a psychotherapist, a social worker, counselor, whatever, what you do is to study the culture, right? And then you become literate in that culture. So, say for example, if I have this friend from Colombia, and then I know of very well, and I learn about the culture from him, then I suddenly feel that like, okay, and I know Colombian culture, and then like I make assumptions about people from Colombia, and well, guess what? Like I may be right, like 60% of the time or 70% of the time, but like I can be wrong because not everyone from that country is the same. And this is like what we criticize in the cultural literacy approach. When I first came to Canada, for instance, I was told that like, you know, Aboriginal people in Canada had a very different concept of time. So if you make an appointment with them, like don't expect them to come on time. And then like when I later on when I learn more about this, I think some of my First Nations colleagues would find it to be an insulting observation, you know, like at least as a misunderstanding, because there's huge difference among people coming from the same background. So like I became like more seriously interested in this in the 90s, and like yeah, we published and we did research and advocated for sort of like a more nuanced approach to this. The homogeneity assumption refers to this like simple thinking that like everyone coming from the same culture is the same. Like say for example, you may say that like all Chinese people are not verbally expressive of the emotions, they are family oriented, but like if you talk to my parents and who are Chinese, and you talk to my children who are also Chinese, then you know like how different things can be, right? So the homogeneity assumption ignores the fact that like one, there are like huge differences like across generations. There are also huge like gender difference, and there can be like significant difference related to socioeconomic status, like education level and level of exposure to other cultures. Like in an increasingly globalized environment, we have people in most parts of the world having access like to information and cultural input from other cultures, and then they selectively internalize different elements from different cultures. So like even in cultures or places that are supposedly less influenced by, you know, the dominant Euro-American system, you will have people there, you know, buying into a lot of Euro-American values. And then like here in North America, we have people who do not identify with the dominant Euro-American values, and they're like sort of more supportive or subscribing to like minority cultural influences. So in this context, what is more important is to look at what cultural values a person has internalized, rather than just like making the simple attribution that, oh, this person is from Serbia, then he or she must be like that. This person is from Tanzania, and he or she must be like that. And I think that's really important. So, and this is why we are learning this SSLD system, to always pay attention to individual differences. And when we are not sure, we may want to pay more attention, listen more carefully, and sometimes we may want to find out more directly from the person that we're interacting with.
So far in session 3, we have been talking about reception, which is one of the basic building blocks of relationships. And reception really allows us to understand other people, and when we can do so accurately, we can better understand their needs and develop a better relationship. Now we'll be moving on to another building block of relationships, which is expression. And expression is the ability to articulate facts, ideas, emotions, and needs. And likewise, expression allows us to build better relationships with others, and it allows us to further our own purpose and goals. So in this section, we will be talking about expression. And expression, just like reception, is a very important component of communication. I'm wondering if you want to start by talking about facts, and how can we sort of present facts in the best possible manner.
Well, you know, like I am almost feeling very nervous now as I have to answer this question, because, you know, like the entire business of academia and maybe education is about how do we present certain facts effectively. And I'm not sure when I'm answering your question, I'm not sure, like, are we doing this right even ourselves? So what I can say is that, like, there is obviously a whole scholarship on, like, how can we present facts better. Like, you know, at the university, we have, like, specialists who are helping our graduate students and undergrad students to write better, so that they present facts and ideas better. And then, like, in some disciplines in the sciences, they have, like, really organized structures for people to be present things like what you did, right, in the experiment, what happened, what are the results, how do you analyze the data. So we have, like, actually very well established protocols for presenting facts. And then, like, in some disciplines, like in the management schools or in law, people are trained to present facts in a certain way in order to achieve whatever objective they have. Like, if you're presenting facts in a court in an adversarial situation versus you're presenting facts to your client as a lawyer, well, you do it differently. So we're probably not going to get into details in those. What we may want to be focusing on is, like, when we're in an interpersonal situation, when we're trying to develop a relationship, how are we going to present facts, and what facts should we be presenting? I think the important thing here, of course, is to look at the purpose of our engagement. Like, are we trying to build friendship here, or are we trying to start a romantic relationship here, or are we trying to sell something, right? Or am I trying to resolve conflict? So the kind of facts that you are trying to present is always contingent upon the purpose of the engagement. So what do you plan to accomplish? And then an effective communication is based on a good understanding of your partner or the person that you're interacting with. What are this person's N3C? So if we know the person's needs, circumstances, characteristics, and capacity, then we'll be, like, selecting our presentation of facts accordingly. I think that's the general principle. Say, for example, if I know that, like, you really have, like, pent up emotions that you need to be letting out, presenting facts that would, like, further provoke you, obviously would not help, right? So I would be presenting facts that would be that would make it easier for you to have an alternate construction of reality and reframe your situation, and give you maybe the perfect excuse to, like, share some of your feelings. Let me give you an example. Like if I'm talking to someone about being bullied at work, right? And you have like a lot of pent-up feelings. If I have like a range of options to select to tell you facts about. I can tell you that, oh, you know what, 60% of like women working in Canada have experienced that, right? That is like one set of facts, right? And if I tell you that, well, like people who utilize, services within their system to address this, like harassment office or like HR department, or talking to your union representative can help you. That is like another kind of fact that I can present to you. If I find that you are very interested in talking about the personality of the bullier, right? Then I can say, oh yeah, like people who bully are usually people with poor self-image and like inadequate social skills themselves, and these people generally do not even have like good mental health, and I understand that by sharing this with you, it is not how accurate the facts are that matters. Is to give you an opportunity to sort of express your emotions in a way that you feel comfortable with. Right. So that is like I think the key idea now when we're talking about like what facts are we communicating, and then we do not obviously rule out that in some situation all you need would be simple, straightforward facts like I'm going to Japan, like I'm going to Kyoto. Like, do you know of like hotels that are like clean, like convenient and affordable, right? And then like I can be responding to it in a sort of like more matter of fact manner.
Expression of facts depends on the purpose of engagement, whether you are trying to build a friendship or establishing a romantic relationship. You should also have a good understanding of your partner's N3C, their needs, circumstances, characteristics, and capacity in order to communicate effectively. If you've forgotten what N3C stands for, please check out Module 1, Lecture 1.6.
It sounds like you said, the purpose of what you're saying and the audience of who you're saying it to is really important with facts. Now, I imagine with ideas, it's even more complex than that.
Well, yeah, like when we're talking about, expression of ideas, like we want to express in a way that's effective, and what is effective actually depends on what is the purpose of the communication. So if I'm trying to convince you of something, or I want you to do something, like that's different ways to be communicating an idea. For instance, like if we have an idea of like going to do something together, and then like I was thinking of going on a canoe trip, and you were thinking of like going to a shopping mall, or the other way around. Or I want to go to a concert, and you want to go camping. So these are different ideas, right? And when we say that, like, I don't think this is a good idea, what we are essentially saying, this is not the way that I want it, right? It doesn't address my needs, right? So when we run into situations like this, we try to understand what this other person's needs might be, and then try to address it, and then come up with something that we also want to do, right? So that is like the negotiation of like two sets of needs and circumstances, characteristics, and sometimes we have to pay attention to capacity as well. So the N3Cs of two individuals have to be matched for us to come up with a good idea, right? So that is like one way to look at it.
So in this negotiation between two people, I'm wondering if you have any sort of technical tips or strategies for how to express one's idea effectively to the other person.
Well, like we have talked about like focusing on the other person's needs, right? That is like primary, most important. And other than that, like one of the things that we want to be paying attention to is like, are we using language or metaphors or illustrations that are easily understood by the other party? Because we all grow up and got educated like in different contexts, and sometimes we think that what we have taken for granted to be like understood or easy may not be what the other person's idea of the same thing. And like we sometimes use simple examples like spending time together, and like so one person's idea of like spending time together can be like totally different than another person's idea of like what is spending time together. So like clarifying what we want to communicate is important. It is also important to understand what the familiar language and metaphors that the other person is using. I very often use this analogy. If you're in early childhood education, for example, you want to be explaining some very complex ideas to younger children. You sort of like break it down into smaller parts, and then you use metaphors that the child can understand. And sometimes we are not preoccupied with the technical accuracy of like what you're conveying. If you're trying to explain the concept of time, right, to a young child, or you're trying to deal with like epistemological issues, like I can give you a wonderful example. I was like out in Sichuan helping with like the disaster relief after the 28 earthquake, and I was in a high school, and then this high school headmaster actually taught an epistemology class, right? Like some people don't even understand the word epistemology, which refers to the theory of knowledge. And I asked her, like, how do you like teach your like grade 6 students? They have like a very different system there, right? So he said, like, I went into the classroom with an apple, and then I asked my students, like, what is this? And they all say apple. So, and then I asked them, so what is an apple? And then they will say fruit, right? And then he will, at that point, take the apple and throw it at another student. And then, so the student will take the apple, right, catch it, and then he will ask the student, like, throw it to someone else, right? And after a few rounds, he will be asking the class again, so what is an apple? Right? What is the apple now, right? So he's using that to convey an idea, right? And trying to use it like within a context where people would have like a different language and metaphor, but they were getting this idea that like an apple is not always a fruit. The apple can also be a toy. The apple in this case can function like a ball, right? So so that is like an example of like how we like utilize different language, metaphors, and circumstantial reality to convey ideas in a creative way.
Yeah, it seems like being sort of attuned to your audience or the other party is so important.
Yeah.
And then I guess how can you tell if, the metaphor you're using, for instance, is sort of they're understanding it and they're accepting your idea?
Well, yeah, you have already given the keyword. Like the keyword is to stay attuned. And how do we do that? Like, and in SSLD, we're looking for specific behavioral markers. When people can extend on your metaphor, right? That means they have got the idea, or they can elaborate on it, or they can give you similar examples, right? So after, say, for example, you have worked with this like 12-year-olds, and with an apple, and then you bring in something else now, right? And ask them what this is, right? If they can tell you a different way of classification, then you know right, that they have got the idea. So say, for example, after you've taken in an apple, right, and then you say, you bring in like a cat, right, and ask people, what is this? And it's a cat. So what is a cat, right? And then people can say, well, it's an animal or it's a pet. And then you can ask, so can the cat be something else, right? And if they can answer, right, then if someone can tell you that, oh, the cat can actually be a guide, be a therapist, or the cat can be your teacher, or the cat can be part of a your decor. The cat can be your message to your customer about how this space is like an animal friendly space. So you can then that these students are getting the idea. So you stay attuned. You're looking for extension of of your idea or specific application of it, elaboration. And sometimes, especially in a pedagogical and an educational setting, you can actually ask people, so what is the idea that you have got? And this skill of clarification actually works both ways, and this is something that we encourage in communication. Sometimes we would just say to the other person that I just do not want to misunderstand you, so I'm going to tell you what I've heard from you. Is that what you are saying to me? So that is seeking clarification and confirmation. Sometimes you can be doing the same. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. I have talked about this. Can you tell me what did it mean to you? Does it make sense to you? Because we don't want to be asking this question that can be taken as questioning, or sometimes some people can take it as a humiliating question, you thinking that I don't understand you, or I'm not following. So instead of do you understand, or repeat to me what I've told you, this is sort of a more didactic top-down approach. We're asking, so what do you think of it? Yeah, does it make sense to you? How does it make sense to you? Or sometimes to make the other party feel better. So I've told you this. Do you see something wrong with this, or what aspect of it you like better, right? So you can be asking questions like that to get direct feedback from the other person.
So we've talked about expressing factual information and also expressing ideas and how to do it effectively. Now, coming up next is emotions, and I somehow feel that emotions aren't as easy to, express effectively.
Yeah, because when we are doing a course like this, we are making an assumption that we ourselves will challenge. That is we are making this assumption that's obviously not valid. We assume that people will behave rationally, and if you take a course like this on relationship, then you'll be following the principles and the rules and and doing it in your real life. Well, I would say most people probably won't be able to do that. And when we're in a situation when we have to express or communicate emotions, well, the first thing is that we become emotional. And when we become emotional, it almost doesn't really make sense for us to say that you should do this or you shouldn't do that. So for us to really be in a position where we can feel better about ourselves and be able to be who we are emotionally, and then express ourselves emotionally, I wouldn't say that even in a appropriate way, but in a way that we feel comfortable with, in a way that we like. We have to recognize that the expression of emotion itself is not always and cannot be always rational. Right? So that is yeah, the basic principle. And when we do that, the most important thing is when we are expressing emotions, unlike expressing ideas or facts, we are not only trying to communicate something to the other person, we are also dealing with our internal state. Usually when we express emotions, the very act of expressing emotion itself will change the emotion that we're expressing. Say, for example, I'm expressing anger to you, and then I have these opportunity to like let all this anger out, and then I find that like you're not reacting with like anger and aggression, but you're more accommodating and understanding, then I'll feel less angry, right? So if I'm like expressing like jealousy, and then you are telling me like more things about like how wonderful your life is and all that, that will make me more jealous, right? So the kind of like expression and feedback that we got like will immediately fit into the emotional experience that we have. And I think there are like a couple of key concepts that we have in SSLD1. Of course, is like the simple mechanism of emotional regulation, which deals with like the current emotion that we're experiencing, and the other one we will call it emotional work, which is sort of like a sort of like a more elaborate process in which we try to get understanding of our own emotional experience and deal with like some of this difficult emotions that may even have a long history. It can be like childhood trauma, it can be some unfinished emotional business or emotional baggages that we have been carrying in our life for a long period of time.
So it sounds like emotional regulation, not just emotional expression, but the regulation of emotions is really important. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, like I just said that like when you're expressing emotions, you feel emotional, right? And then being able to regulate your own emotion is actually a very important human capacity. There is a concept in biology which is also utilized a lot in psychology. That is the concept of homeostasis. It's sort of like the so-called normal state that we tend to return to. So we have like a sort of like normal heart rate or blood pressure. It can change when you're like active, or when you're aroused, or when you're dealing with like some external challenge. But it will like body temperature as well, right? So but then everything will return to more or less the same level. So with emotions, like we hope the same thing will happen, right? So if you get excited, you get stimulated, you get aroused, hopefully you'll be returning to a sort of like a relatively calm and stable state. But if it doesn't happen, it can then become a mental health challenge, like people who are chronically depressed, for example, right? People who feel sad, and they might have good reasons for feeling that, but like the problem is that they do not return to sort of like a more stable state in which you are not sad, right? Or if you're anxious, which is probably a natural response to external stress or threat or challenge. But again, if you're constantly in that state and you do not return to a sort of like a more relaxed and calm state, something is wrong with your emotional regulation. So problems with emotional regulation can actually become severe mental health or even physical health issues. And in that interpersonal relationship, if you're not able to regulate your emotion, then you have like a higher chance of doing things or saying things that you would later regret. So it is obviously a good thing for us to be able to become aware of our emotional experience and be able to increase our capacity for regulating it. And I just want to say this, like we're not talking about suppressing your emotions. We're not talking about denying your emotions. Those are actually not helpful. Good emotional regulation actually is predicated on like, I know that I'm feeling this, like I know that I'm angry, I know that I'm anxious, or I'm sad or depressed. It doesn't matter. I know that I have those feelings, and I accept that I have those feelings. But I also understand that, like, yeah, I know I have those feelings, but I have the capacity to return to this, like, sort of like homeostatic state. Then I feel more comfortable and relaxed, and when I try to express my emotions, I know that, like, this is what I need to do now, but like I will get to a different state after that. I think that is an important understanding.
And it sounds like previously you sort of talked about emotional work.
Mm-hmm.
And the concept just seems so intriguing and just interesting in terms of like, would emotional work allow people to then be better able to self-regulate their own emotions? So that's something I definitely want to learn more about.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're interested. Like, I may just like say a couple of things, and then like I'll let you figure this out like more. Yeah. So when we talk about emotional work, we're talking about like sort of a more extensive or elaborate process than emotional regulation. Like, say for example, if I am in a situation and then something triggered a certain emotion in me, and I feel anxious or nervous or threatened or angry, and then like after a while I was able to express that emotion, hopefully not in like an overly destructive manner, I return to a homeostatic state. So and then I have like reasonably good emotional regulation, right? But emotional work like refers to like a more extensive process. Say for example, if I find that I'm chronically anxious or chronically depressed, or whenever I come across, say for example, like authority figures, I would become like angry and aggressive, or whenever I'm in the company of someone that I'm interested in erotically, I would like freeze, or I would have like this immense tension and I stutter and couldn't speak. That I understand there might be like a longer term problem that I have. It's a pattern that might have like been around for a while, and in order to work on it, to free myself from this pattern, is what we mean by emotional work. And I'm happy that you're interested, so maybe you can explore this further.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So you've written in the book that expressing needs is so incredibly important because that's someone's way to get their needs met is by expressing them. So what are some successful ways to express needs?
Well, before we talk about successful ways or better ways to express needs, maybe we want to first think about why is it difficult to express needs. Like emotions, right? When you are emotional, right? It's difficult for you to figure out how am I going to express my emotions appropriately, and understanding yourself, right, is a condition for like effective or appropriate expression. With needs, there is this similar process here, because like when you have needs, right, then you're needy, right? When you have needs that are not met and you're trying to get the other person to help you address your needs, very often it will make people feel inadequate. Some people may feel vulnerable, and that's why not everyone is comfortable expressing their needs. And then the other thing is like, because when we're in a relationship, especially when you're in a relationship with a certain history and there are like negative experience in the past, a lot of people do not want to express their needs because they're afraid of like being disappointed or frustrated. And in some like extreme cases, some people are very afraid of expressing their needs because the expression of needs may lead to punishment or aggression or abuse, right? So some people will find it really difficult, right? And they would rather hide their needs or conceal them, or express them in some other ways that are not explicit, that are not direct. So that is like the condition a lot of people may find themselves in. So yeah, like, but once you get to understand your needs, right, and you know you have to express them, then you will be like able to learn a thing or two from the SSLD system to do it. The first thing, of course, like we have been repeating this many, many times, maybe too many times already in this course, is that you have to first distinguish between what is the thing that you want and what is the thing that you need, and because what you want may not be what you need. And if you already know what you need, then you understand that there usually are multiple ways for that need to be addressed. And when you're expressing that need to someone, you want to express that in a way that the other person can understand. And sometimes you want to express it in such a way that the other person can reasonably respond to. Let's say, for example, you're traveling and then you're in a strange country, and then you're feeling sort of like lost and also insecure, and what you need would be like a sense of safety and protection. But you do not go around telling people like, I'm really scared in this place, I'm feeling very insecure, I want to feel protected. Maybe you don't want to do that, right? So what you might want to do is like you'll be like looking for the next person who might seem like a good company, who would not like create more difficulty or challenge for you, and then you will just like go up to this person and start negotiating an initial relationship. What you're actually looking for may be a sense of security and maybe some direction, but you may not be expressing that need right from the onset. Like, so you will be showing some kind of affiliation needs of being friendly to people, or you may even be asking for some kind of help, like directions, so you may be like doing it in an incremental manner. So that is also like a strategy that a lot of people adopt. What we find is that like when you have like an important need, you do not necessarily always express it right away. When we look at how like beautiful dramas evolve in human relationships that we read in literature, very often these relationships go through a process, and then it is the relationship that creates the opportunity for people to become more aware of their own needs. So it is not a linear process. It's the same thing with emotion, I have to say. Like when we talked about emotions, we probably didn't get into this too much. We're talking about how to express emotions. Actually, one of the things that is great about relationships is that, like, if I'm in a relationship that provides me with a space where I can just freely express my emotions without being afraid of being judged, being attacked, that would be wonderful. I would say the same thing about needs, right? In a relationship, if there's like a space, a trusting, safe space for me to just express my needs, it would be wonderful. So, so it is not just like how we do it, right? Yeah, we want to be doing it nicely, doing it well, but we also are looking forward to developing relationships that would open up the space for this kind of expression to happen more freely and spontaneously.
And I guess the more complex the need, or the more emotions involved, the kind of better relationship you have to be able to express it.
Very true. And then we can also say this, the same thing about, like, the more able you are to do that, right? It will help to build a relationship. Like in a relationship, when like both parties can like express their needs and their emotions freely, then I think, and then if both parties are like open and embracing and accepting, then I think the relationship would grow. So you're right. Like, so, and then it will then start a virtuous cycle, right? Like things getting better, and then better self-understanding, more effective communication, like expanding the shared space in the relationship. That would be wonderful.
So we have reached the end of session 3. And in this session, we've covered the 2 basic building blocks of relationships, and these are receptive skills and expressive skills. And through these skills, we really kind of learned that by being able to really understand and hear people, we will be able to understand their underlying needs. And in doing so, we can just develop more trusting and better relationships with others. On the other hand, through expression, we sort of learned that by being able to better express our facts, ideas, emotions, and needs, we can better reach our goals. Now, something that I found really interesting just with learning all the things in session 3 was attributional frames, and how, some people kind of make sense of reality through these frames, and most of us don't really even stop to think about it. So I'll definitely be paying more attention to my own attributional frame and the attributional frames of other people in my life, and sort of try to understand myself and others better through that. The other thing that I really found interesting in this session was how heavily regulated our self-expression of our emotions is by society, and how there are many emotions we don't express and many emotions we sort of suppress because of what society tells us, and that there are even cultural differences in how we express ourselves and in how we understand others. And this is also definitely something I'll be paying attention to in the future.
Hello, and welcome to the presentation on the SSLD, or Strategies and Skills Learning and Development Approach to Emotional Work. So I would like to start off just by introducing myself. My name is Alona Larianova, and I'm a recent graduate of the Master of Social Work program at the University of Toronto, and I specialized in health and mental health. You may also remember me from other parts of this course, in my role as an anchor and teaching assistant, as well as one of the actors in this course. Let's make a start. So I would like to begin by drawing your attention to these 4 situations and thinking about the commonality between all of them. We have a paramedic who is experiencing what sounds like symptoms of trauma or even PTSD following a car accident, including intrusive flashbacks of the event and nightmares. Then there's a woman who is having some commitment problems with long-term relationships. A teenager who is experiencing panic attacks every time that he has to present something in front of a crowd of people. And finally, we have a daughter who has not spoken to her father in 3 years. On the surface, it seems like each person is dealing with very different problems. But I would like you to think about what is underlying each of these problems. The commonality is that each of these individuals have likely not had their emotional needs properly met in the past. The emotions they were feeling were not expressed appropriately, and as a result have become dysregulated in some way. For example, the paramedic may have witnessed a horrific car accident, and he didn't get a chance to debrief with his peers afterwards. As a result, he didn't properly express the fear and sadness and distress that he was feeling, and these feelings have continued to affect him both physically and emotionally. Perhaps the woman who has difficulty committing to long-term relationships has been cheated on in the past, and she internalized all the anger and hurt she felt. Now, maybe she feels like she can't trust others not to hurt her the way she was hurt before. And maybe the teenager was raised by highly critical parents that always demanded perfectionism. All the unprocessed frustration of not being able to meet the high standards set out for him have resulted in a fear of being in situations where he feels judged by others. And finally, maybe the daughter has never forgiven her father for leaving her mother. She doesn't know how to express her anger, so instead she just avoids him. Such chronic dysregulation of emotions is actually quite common and may affect each of us to some extent. So what can we do about it? How do we fix chronically dysregulated emotions? One effective solution may be emotional work. This is a process of dealing with long-term emotional issues in order to stop them from bothering us and compromising our life. During this process, we learn to identify the emotions we're feeling get in touch with them, and own them. Emotional work can take many different forms. For instance, the paramedic from the earlier example might need to work through the emotions connected to his past trauma in order to prevent them from affecting his life now. The woman who is afraid of commitment may need to work through her long-term experience of poor self-esteem and internalization of blame for past relationship failures. The teenager afraid of public speaking might need to work through past feelings of shame and conflict with his family. And the daughter who hasn't spoken to her father may need to work on resolving this long-term conflict. So why is there a need to do emotional work? Why do these issues affect us to this extent? Well, emotions are socially regulated. We've already learned about how society encourages the expression of certain emotions and discourages others. Even when people are allowed to feel certain emotions, there are often social rules or cues about how they must be expressed. For example, sometimes you can express friendship with a hug, but perhaps not a kiss. Or you can express happiness with laughter, but maybe not with dancing on your desk. I actually have a personal example of one of the times that I realized the extent to which my own emotional experience is socially regulated. When I received my acceptance letter to grad school, I was so happy. In fact, to the point that I almost didn't know what to physically do with myself. I was home alone and I started doing a little happy dance. And then I felt embarrassed about it, even though there was nobody even there to see. And, this acceptance was something to be really happy about. And so, unfortunately, a lot of us end up dealing with our emotions in ways that aren't healthy. Especially those difficult emotions like anger, fear, anxiety, sadness, sexuality, loneliness, and so on. We deal with them by denying, suppressing, or repressing them. Vulnerability is one emotion that I find many people can have a really difficult time with. Being vulnerable with themselves, with their friends and family, with acquaintances and strangers. There's actually a really great TED Talk that illustrates one woman's struggle with vulnerability and the emotional work that she had to do on herself in order to open herself up to the experience of being vulnerable and just to understand vulnerability in general. If you're interested, I've included a link to this TED Talk in this slide. I highly recommend it. So, how do we do emotional work? Well, seeing as our positive and negative emotional experiences are typically caused by relationships or happen in the context of relationships, we also have to look to relationships to help us do emotional work. In most cases, people turn to the secure and helpful relationships in their life to help them work through difficult or challenging emotional experiences. This can include family members and friends, but it can also include professional relationships, including counseling and psychotherapy, spiritual guidance, life coaching, and so on. Professional help might be especially important if your family members or friends are the main cause of your chronic emotional dysregulation, or if you've tried to talk it through and it just hasn't helped. Now we're going to be taking a look at the specific process that emotional work typically involves, from the perspective of the SSLD approach. Keep in mind that the process that's outlined here is sequential, but it's very important to understand that it's going to look differently and take a different path for each individual, and the steps won't necessarily be in the same sequence as is shown here. This is just a general outline or guideline for what typically happens. So the first step, and the really important prerequisite of emotional work, is to have a safe space that's characterized by trust, openness, and acceptance. This is especially important to be able to open up and explore emotions and manage the feelings that come up without the underlying fear of being judged or disliked. This is basically like taking away some of the judgment that is always present in social settings that prevents us from being emotionally authentic. The second step involves becoming aware of the emotions we are feeling and being able to recognize them. So, this may mean encouraging a person to focus on experiencing their emotions instead of suppressing them. This might involve locating where the emotion is felt in the body. Is it in the chest? Is it in the stomach? This might also involve encouraging the spontaneous expression of emotions through activities like journaling, drawing, dance, meditation, and so on. Once a person becomes more comfortable with feeling the emotion, the next step is typically articulating or naming that emotion. It can actually be surprisingly difficult to name the emotion you're feeling, because this means accepting and acknowledging what you feel, even if it's one of those really difficult socially regulated emotions like anger, guilt, shame, etc. Although it's difficult, by being able to accurately name the emotion that you feel, you can actually begin to take ownership of that emotion. This means that instead of telling yourself, what this person did to me was hurtful, you can be more accurate and tell yourself, what this person did to me was not only hurtful, but it also made me feel really angry. So, by being able to name and to take ownership of the actual feeling, anger in this example, one can move on to expressing the true emotion that they're feeling. With the SSLD approach, there are a number of options that a person can choose for expressing the emotion, based on what they feel the most comfortable with at that time. So, this might entail privately expressing the emotion, or when the person is ready with the other party who is involved. The expression can also involve verbal or nonverbal methods, depending again on the individual's preference. And for those who find it challenging to deal with the emotions on their own, there's also an option to seek help from professionals such as counselors. Step 6 involves channeling, venting, or catharsis of emotions, which basically means that the emotion is released without inhibition, suppression, or holding back. It involves allowing oneself to really let go of that tight control that we usually hold over our feelings in order to restore homeostasis. Step 7 is self-acceptance. Of course, this can look differently for each person, but ultimately, the goal for everyone is to increase one's sense of agency and self-efficacy. By engaging in this process, we can begin to understand our emotions and become more accepting of them. By accepting how we feel, we also become more accepting of ourselves and who we are. Transformation, reconstruction, and resolution of our conflict, ambivalence, trauma happens when we realize that the emotions we're feeling are not as dangerous and overwhelming as they felt in the beginning. Because we understand and accept the feelings that we experience, we can actually start to work on managing them when they do come up. And so, the ninth and the final step is to leave the safe place where emotional work has taken place and go back out into the real world, bringing along the lessons and skills that we learned along the way. Emotional work doesn't mean that the emotions have gone away or are no longer problematic. It just means that we have learned to understand how we're feeling and then to employ useful skills and strategies in managing our emotional expression in a healthy way. One key idea of the SSLD approach to emotional work is learning different ways of expressing emotions. Here are some examples. Verbalizing and naming our emotions is one important skill to have. Some people who may experience difficulties in naming emotions can use other tricks like symbols or color-coded objects. One example of using symbols is actually using emojis, or the little smiley faces that are used on your phone or with other social media platforms. Sometimes to identify an emotion, it might help to identify where in your body you feel it. For example, some people associate grief or heartbreak with the very real sensation of an aching heart. For others, a fear of anxiety might involve butterflies in the tummy or a tightness across the chest. So when you feel these physical sensations, and you've already linked them to different emotions that they represent, it might also be an easy way to recognize the emotion you're feeling. Another strategy is being able to articulate how a person is feeling. For instance, just providing a description of sensations like a fire in my chest and racing thoughts to describe anger. In addition to naming or describing the emotion, expression can take so many other forms. It can include body postures, stories, pictures, music, dance, and so on, based of course on individual preferences and abilities and cultural context. For example, many people might find it helpful to express grief privately by doing things like scrapbooking, but also as a community by doing things like storytelling and reminiscing. So, as we talk about emotional work and becoming more aware of our emotions and being able to express them in a healthy way, some of you may be thinking, well, what if a person isn't just dealing with one negative emotion or one difficult emotion? What if someone feels hurt and angry and ashamed, but then they're also watching a funny movie and they're feeling happy? This is actually a concept that's referred to as pluri-emotionality, and it means that we can experience many emotions at the same time. Often, our mind can zero in on one particular emotion given on the situation that we're in, our needs at that moment, our personal characteristics like gender, age, sexual orientation, etc., and our capacity, or our existing repertoire or toolbox of strategies and skills. And keep in mind, no pun intended, when we are focusing on one particular emotion at a time, this doesn't mean that the rest of the emotions disappear. They're still going on for us in the back of our minds even when we're not aware of this. And just like the primary emotion on our mind, these emotions are also having very real physical and psychological effects on us. When we're having trouble with dealing with multiple difficult emotions, how do we get in touch with what we're feeling and also be able to get these emotions out or express them? Well, start with one emotion first. Usually the emotion that a person chooses to begin with is the emotion that's the most salient or that stands out the most. Maybe the emotion that is affecting that person's life the most at that particular time. And the best thing to do is to start with where the person is at and what they're ready for. As one emotion is dealt with and processed, the other emotions can then be addressed once the person is ready to go there. In order to make sense of the emotions that one is experiencing, usually some kind of structure, frame, or lens is needed. Emotions can also be represented symbolically, either through language, art, music, dance, action, craft, ritual, or a signifying act. So one example that comes to mind for me is classical music, and how often one piece can express so many different emotions. And these emotions give us a better understanding of what each composer might have been going through when the piece was written. If you listen to Beethoven's Für Elise, for instance, which was meant to be a love song, you don't just hear romance or happiness. You hear some wistfulness, maybe some melancholy, turmoil, and even sadness. The benefits of emotional work. Of course, the main benefits that we've talked about so far is just being able to understand, accept, and express the emotions that we are experiencing. There are also a number of other benefits to emotional work, some of which are listed here. Emotional work gives us the ability to look back on emotional episodes and understand what happened and why. It gives us the ability to understand when we are feeling multiple emotions and which ones are the most important to attend to in that moment. It gives us the ability to make sense of our past, current, and future experiences by viewing them through this newly acquired emotional lens. It also gives us greater insight and understanding into people who have hurt us in the past, and perhaps even an ability to feel empathy for their experiences. It provides emotional support through being able to better connect with our loved ones and reach out to them for support. The experience is embodied, which means that when we heal emotionally, we also heal physically, as our emotions and bodily sensations are interconnected. And finally, by being able to process and express emotions, we are in a sense performing self-care by meeting our own emotional needs.